Okay, I think we can call to order the Business Services meeting for School District 303 at 5:31 p.m. on March 3rd. We have some citizen comments. We do have one individual for citizen comments. So before we start citizen comments, I'd like to read the statement before public comment. During public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on a topic of their choosing. Once the speaker has reached the 3-minute time limit, a timer will sound and the speaker will be asked to finish their comment. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility toward others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members. And this brings us to our first comment. Rosa Morales on the dual language program.
My name is Rosa Morales, and I'm a parent to students in D303 and also the president of BPAC, the Bilingual Parent Advisory Committee. I have said it before, but I'll say it again, and as president of the BPAC, my role is to establish a communication process between parents and school administrators. Now, with that said, these remarks are regarding the one-way dual program, and I speak for myself and for other parents who have their children in the program. We feel like we have wasted our time fighting for something that was already planned to be taken away from the beginning. Families have lost hope and completely lost your trust. If this was the end goal, it should have just been said and done. We have had meetings with families like the one on December 4th, where we felt like we just went to get shut down every time we had something to say and rushed to leave and stop talking once the hour was over. We still had so many questions and the recommendations still didn't seem clear to us. And the one last week, February 27th, where you explained to us what will come and then asking us to share valuable feedback to help shape the future of the program. But for what? We were just another box to check and move on. There was a board meeting on December 16th where Dr. Igo said, "We'll see after the president gets in office." Parents and me have been looking for the playback where this was said, and it seems to be cut off, and we can't find it. Regardless, I can hear it now, and it's been engraved on my mind ever since. That probably meant nothing to any of you, but to me and many other families, we took that to heart. And with everything that has been going on in the real world, all we heard was that there will be no families left. So let's get rid of this now. And now we have to trust the system with our children, knowing that this is how you decide on things with a bare minimum of communication to us and only asking for questions from us about decisions that you don't intend to change. My kids' teachers have been the best, and it hurts knowing we don't have the support we need. A question that was asked at that meeting also was, have our educators been involved? And this was about the e-learning. If this question is being asked for e-learning, why isn't it being asked for our dual program? Have our educators been involved? Also, just how there will be resources for e-learning, it would be great to have our parents in the dual programs to have resources too. Now, all this sounds political at this point, and after all, Mr. President is set to sign an executive order making English the official U.S. language. And this just makes it easier for you all to decide, and I guess it just leaves us with no other choice. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, and that is our only commenter. So next up, we have our 4 discussion items. Item 2A is the Mid-Valley January financial report.
Mid-Valley is reporting that revenue continues to trend ahead of the prior year due to the timing of tuition payments. Expenditures are trending just ahead of the prior year, and there are no areas of concern at this time.
Okay, next up is the CUSD 303 January financial report.
Both revenue and expenditures for CUSD 303 are trending slightly ahead of the prior year. The state continues to make regular EBF payments, and the district has received the second categorical payment of the year in January. There are no areas of concern in the budget at this time.
Right, and item C, Wild Rose Playground replacement.
An IGA exists with St. Charles Park District for the maintenance and shared responsibilities for our school playgrounds. As part of this, we share costs and responsibility to replace our playgrounds at all our elementary schools. The next elementary school ready for replacement is Wild Rose Elementary. Over the past several months, the Park District has worked alongside school and the facilities department to plan and design for this replacement. The Park District put the project out to bid and received 6 bids for this work. Out of the 6, the lowest bidder was deemed not a responsible bidder due to past experience with both the Park District and the school district. So we are recommending award to the second lowest bidder, George's Landscape, Inc. They have successfully completed many projects for the St. Charles Park District. As part of this, the total award, including 2 alternates that were selected, totals $340,391. I should point out that my attached memo does indicate a 50-50 split for these services. While most of the IGA does require a 50-50 split between both government agencies, there was one change, or not change, but one oversight on my part, that the equipment part of this will actually be a 2/3 school district, 1/3 Park District per the IGA that exists. So the site preparation, installation, everything still remains a 50-50 split, but when this comes back to board in March or next week, you'll see a slightly revised number, closer to probably about 30 or 40,000 more than you say here. After some conversations with the Park District, I'll solidify that number.
I think we move this one to consent.
And next up is Munhall Phase 2 Equipment Package.
So as you're aware, we've already purchased and awarded equipment for this summer's gym and cafe cooling projects. We also have awarded the installation and labor package of this last month. One item that does need to be ordered is an electrical panel for the increased load that will be on the school at Munhall. To procure this in time, we utilized Helm Mechanical through the Equalis Co-op to purchase this panel in the total amount of $33,130.
Consent?
And item E, the ROI Multilingual Program Analysis and Recommendation. Excuse me.
I have to go maximum height with these short little legs. Okay, so welcome everybody. As just mentioned, we're going to be going into a very deep dive of the work that we've been collectively working on for the multilingual program analysis and process, along with some recommendations. I do want to just briefly state that we do genuinely care about the feedback that we are receiving. I promise you that. We're taking all of the feedback deeply into consideration, and this has been a very, I'd say, a collective effort to try and come out with some great student outcomes. And we care very deeply, I think, as a collective board, and certainly in an administration, and we just do want the community to know that this is very near and dear to us, and we want to ensure that we get tremendous student outcomes for all of our students within the district. So please do keep the feedback coming. We are listening, we are hearing, we are responding. Please keep it coming, because it only is going to make us all better. So without further ado, Paul, did you want to kick it off?
I do. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Tonight, we're going to do an academic return on investment, multilingual program analysis. For our district, our commitment statement, Together Building Pathways to Excellence, this presentation tonight absolutely rings true with this commitment statement. It is us together building those pathways for excellence for each group of our students in D303. And as Mr. Kuchert said just a moment ago, it is an absolute responsibility of our organization to do better, especially with a group of students who have been underperforming for a number of years, and we have an opportunity to change that trajectory of our students. Core values, stay one more on that one. For our core values, all three of these core values will be an integral aspect of how we do this work tonight. From the belonging of our students, we honor the dignity of each person by accepting, validating, and appreciating them, and by treating every individual fairly. Perseverance, this is incredibly important in this conversation. I think for a long period of time, our educators with our multilingual students and our dual language program, outside of our dual language program, have been working tirelessly. And I appreciate each and every one of them, as well as our parents and our students in this area of perseverance. Achievement, ultimately, is what the board holds me and others responsible for improving the outcomes for our students. So all three of these core values are center to this conversation tonight. Our strategic priorities of effective collaboration, instructional coherence, and a culture of dignity. You will see each one of these woven throughout our conversations tonight and how they make an impact for our students and for our staff and for our community. Tonight, here are the three large or overarching outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. We're going to recommend an elementary multilingual program service delivery models. We're going to recommend academic and implementation success criteria, discuss the results of the academic return on investment A-ROI study. The agenda is, as stated, quick introduction, case for change or questions, cost analysis, questions, program model, board questions. We're hoping to try to keep it in that order because there's a lot to the story that different members of our team will be sharing tonight. So I'll kick us off tonight. You know what? I apologize. I want to go around the room and have introductions because we do have a large group of individuals with us tonight. Mr. Shazar, would you kick us off?
Dave Chazar, Assessment and Accountability, so working some of the numbers behind the scenes in terms of what all the ROI data in the back end, a lot of that was from our office.
Justin Attaway, Chief Operating Officer.
My name's Nathan Jarrett, the principal at Anderson Elementary School.
I'm Lisa Simon-Selly-Bulak, the principal at Richmond Elementary.
Good evening, Jared Buxton, Executive Director of Elementary Education.
Good evening, Tracy Taylor-Moore, Director of Language Acquisition.
And good evening, Tina King, Senior Director in Learning and Teaching.
Thank you all. So I want to direct our attention to the timeline on the screen. November 13, 2023, an important night where the board took action on three separate items that the administration brought a recommendation forward for each of these action items. The Davis Richmond Elementary approved to be individual K-5s. The transition to a two-way dual language program at Richmond. And construction of a 6th classroom addition at Richmond as well. In March 11th of 2024, the board approved senior leaders to attend an A-ROI conference given by District Management Group, or I'll refer to them as the DM group going forward, for our senior leaders to be involved and to truly understand what an academic return on investment was and how we would be using it. August 26th, there was a pause in construction on the 6th classroom addition at Richmond due to a Pulte development. December 16th, administration came forward with our academic return on investment study design. This is where we brought forward the success criteria, the student segments, and the fully loaded cost. We presented that to the board. Board gave us approval to move forward with that study design. Tonight, we're here to share our new recommendations and an A-ROI findings to the board and the community. What we're hoping, we have consensus by the board to move this forward to March 10th at a board for board action. Again, where the board administration will recommend a new recommendation prior to the November 13th. Administration acknowledges that the board took action on November 13th, 2023, based on administration's recommendations. However, with different information and knowledge from the DM group, we are here tonight to present our new recommendation. A dramatic pause. A case for change. This is that part where we're going to walk in as to how did we get to this moment in time. So the academic return on investment, studying the TBE models. For us, this was an opportunity to be engaged in an ROI process. Our board, for my first 2 years, was asking me and my administration to bring to the board ideas on a return on investment regarding our 9 programs that we had identified as an administration and the board back in I think it was May 25th of 2023. We all agreed that these were the programs we wanted to study. However, we struggled with achieving the board's ends on that ROI thinking. We would bring forward different ideas and it did not match exactly where the board. So we struggled in this area. Mr. Attaway engaged one of our neighboring districts who are working through the A-ROI process with the DM group, engaged in those conversations, found some very interesting aspects that we felt like aligned directly with where we were trying to go and where the board wanted us to go. With that, we further engaged other districts trying to understand the efficacy of the DM group, and everybody came back saying that this was an outstanding organization and it would be well worth our time. We brought that to the board. Board, as I showed on the timeline, was very receptive to this way of looking at our work. For us, it's really critical, those 3 questions. Does the program work? For which students? At what cost? That's the foundational piece of the DM group's academic return on investment. And then it looks at student outcomes. That answers the question, does the program work? Student segments. That answers the question, for which students? Fully loaded cost, that answers the question, at what cost? So this process forced us to re-examine our earlier recommendation. It gave us a different light, a different lens, I should say, in which to look at return on investment focused on our multilingual students.
And to just clarify, so this particular, for the A-ROI, we looked at our TBE model, which is our transitional bilingual education model. We have a number of services that we provide to students across our district, but the focus of this study is our full-time TBE model.
Thank you, Tracy. We can move. I want to set the table at the state level. So this chart is through the Illinois School Board. What they set these program types. So there is either the TBE, the Transitional Bilingual Education Program, or the Transitional Program of Instruction, TPI. But I want to be clear, the state has researched each one of these models for us. TBE is the full-time model. TPI is a part-time model. Dr. Tracy Taylor Moore will go into a little bit more detail as what that is and what that means. But I want to be clear, each one of these program designs have been researched, not only at the state, but the national level. These are only choices we have when it comes to TBE and TPI services. We do not have the opportunity to do a la carte, pick and choose, or make our own. So we have choices under transitional bilingual education, can be self-contained. We're changing the only thing that we're changing is the title, which we have the ability to do that. Self-contained for us, you'll hear later on, in classroom. Because of the terminology around student services, and we already have enough names and acronyms within education to be very confusing, we really wanted to make sure that there was a differentiator there. Or the collaborative. You will also hear the collaborative as well. Within those, the TBE self-contained in classroom, and then dual language programs, one-way or two-way. Those are all choices districts can make if they meet the requirements for a full-time TBE model. On the other side is a TPI model. These are the transitional program of instruction. This is part-time. Those two are the two models in which a school district may choose in those areas. So I just wanted to make sure that we level set from the state. It is not the district. The district selects which one we think will best meet the needs of our students, either full-time or part-time.
And just to add
Please.
clarity to that, so on the right-hand side, transitional programs of instruction refer to multilingual programs that we utilize in schools where there's students less than 20 who have the same native language spoken. So they receive English as a second language services. And then on the left-hand side, that's the transitional bilingual education, which is required by law by the state of Illinois for our students where we have 20 or more speaking the same native language at that school. So just to clarify kind of the difference there. And then TBE, the students are receiving native language support.
Thank you for that. Again, more level setting, multilingual learners by the numbers. You'll see K-12, we have 1,038 multilingual learners throughout our district. Number of Spanish-speaking multilingual learners, K-12, 637, so 61% of all of our multilingual learners are native Spanish-speaking students. At the K-5 level, where we're focused this evening, we have 602 total multilingual students. 348, or 58%, are native Spanish-speaking multilingual students. Of that 348, 204 are currently enrolled in the one-way dual language program. Again, the one-way dual language program is only for native Spanish-speaking multilingual learners. We do have an early childhood program. We have 40 students who are multilingual and 23 whose home or native language is Spanish. Dr. Moore spoke about this a little bit. Do you want to speak in greater detail about this slide, Trace?
Sure. So as I said earlier, we have a requirement to offer transitional bilingual education in our schools where 20 or so currently, we offer a full-time program model for transitional bilingual education at Davis for our K through 2 students and at Richmond for our 3 through 5 students. So one of the things we wanted to really make sure we touched on are the challenges with only having one full-time transitional bilingual education model. So currently, parents have to choose in terms of whether or not they will leave the home school. Because, like I said, our bilingual full-time services are offered at Davis and Richmond only. If your homeschool happens to not be Davis or Richmond, you have to decide between accessing that full-time transitional bilingual education program or remaining at your homeschool and receiving other multilingual services such as the TPI services mentioned earlier. The program also has its limitations in differentiation. The program really cannot fully adapt to different language proficiency levels. We'll go on to in a little bit later to talk about how this particular program model really kind of hinges on students having that native language proficiency to act and serve as a lever to build bridges between what they currently know in their home language or native language and then what we're looking for them to attain in English. So in our model, all students would go into this full-time TBE program model without the opportunity for us to kind of take a look at for whom is this program really best serving. And that third bullet point, enrollment patterns, we'll show a little bit later on here. We have frequent students moving in and out and causes disruption in the ability for us to provide consistent language support to our students. And then there's the busing impact. Transportation to another school affects the student's experience and their access to their services. So some of our students, again, being transported to a different school that's not their home school, where their neighborhood is, where the friendships might be in the sense of belonging for those neighborhoods, they are transported to a different school. Could be across town, could be for a long period of time that they're on the bus, and that really does kind of affect the student's experience both in elementary and then as they matriculate to our middle schools, where different elementary schools feed into different middle schools.
This here is our opportunity for improvement statement and our driving question. Spanish-speaking multilingual learners in grades 3 through 5 in District 303 experienced the largest achievement gaps in ELA and math on the 2024 IAR compared to other groups, and this is consistent over time. Our driving question for us to answer: which transitional bilingual education, TBE, program models will best close the achievement gap for District 303 multilingual learners whose native language is Spanish? That's that driving question that we need to address and we plan to address tonight. Our recommendation to the board: District 303 will transition from one-way dual language to in-classroom and collaborative transitional bilingual education models to better serve our multilingual students. So why move away from one-way dual language? When we look at our overall Spanish-speaking population and the demographic composition in D303 presents challenges to sustain a successful one-way dual language program. And I will say that the academic return on investment helped us pull away some of the things that we were not seeing back on November 13th, 2023. This process allowed us to look at our data differently, that Mr. Shazar will walk us through. So the comparable academic outcomes, there's no significant difference in academic outcomes between students in one-way dual language and those in our part-time program. The total population, D303, has 348 Spanish-speaking multilingual learners in K-5, with 204 currently enrolled in the dual language program. However, this number is further reduced due to other limiting factors. Prior to the start of this school year, Dr. Tracy Taylor Moore, as being the new Director of Language Acquisition for D303, implemented, along with other individuals, to implement an entrance guidance criteria into one-way dual language program. And Tracy will talk about that a little bit more later on. But it was really trying to ensure that we were putting our students in the program that they were going to be most successful. And understanding the research behind that was really key. Again, another critical area that we dove deeply into to understand what are those factors for students to be successful in one-way or two-way dual language programs. And finally, another contributing factor was this high mobility rate. 40% mobility rate among our one-way dual language student population. So when our kindergartners, once they hit 5th grade, 40% of our students have left the program. They have not left it because they did not like the program. They left the program because they moved. So it adds so significant transition in that program. Tracy will also talk about some of that transition, what that looks like. With a declining number of eligible and continuously enrolled students due to entrance criteria and high mobility, the district faces increasing challenges in sustaining a viable and effective one-way dual language program. Tracy?
Okay, so this slide is referring to research considerations regarding our change of practice. A student's native language proficiency at or above grade level supports second language acquisition. This is supported in the research that has examined multilingual student performance in prior school environments where the language of instruction was in their home language, Spanish, as well as in longitudinal studies tracking their progress in later years in English. In one study that examined the performance of Spanish-speaking low socioeconomic status children instructed bilingually in their early years, those who were mostly proficient in Spanish at entry into school scored significantly higher on the English language proficiency test than those who had mostly limited in Spanish abilities. So one of the prime and key research-based underpinnings of such findings is that cognitive skills attained in one language have the ability to transfer to another language with targeted and explicit instruction of the similarities and differences across the languages. We refer to that sometimes in instruction as contrastive analysis across the languages, and also the bridging of instruction from in one language to the other. So given our understanding of this key concept of skills being able to transfer from one language to another, we endeavored last summer, as Dr. Gordon said, to implement entrance guidance into our one-way dual language program that assessed the oral proficiency of our incoming kindergartners who were identified as multilingual learners in their native language in Spanish and in English to ensure a best fit program model. And so we'll talk a little bit later on about what we found. I think that's on the next slide. Yes, it is, and here's later on. Okay, so in this slide, we had 37 students who we assessed incoming kindergartners in their native Spanish and also in English. And of those 37 students, we recommended 26 of those students to go into our one-way dual language program. 11 of those students were not recommended. And of those 11, students who were screened and not recommended for the one-way dual language program due to their limited Spanish proficiency, 3 have since moved out of the district, 1 elected dual language despite the recommendation, and then 7 chose alternate multilingual services that were offered at their home schools. And so again, we talk about the program's challenges and the limited pathways for students for whom one-way dual language is not really the best program model. Again, having to make that choice between, do I go to our full-time program offering at Davis and Richmond if that's not perhaps my home school, or do we not? And then, again, the tough decision of, without that entrance guidance to help guide their decision, that was really something that was impactful and important. We wanted to make sure that we gave parents the opportunity to know all of the information that we could on their students' current proficiency in both languages to make the best informed decision for their families, knowing that having to choose between a homeschool and going to another school would be something that's a big consideration.
I'm gonna take this slide. So as mentioned earlier, the attrition rate of 40%. This chart tries to demonstrate, we have about 4 years of data in here. So if you look at the far left, that's 100%. So 100% of the students starting kindergarten, they're there in kindergarten. The next bar is year 1, so first grade. And we have roughly 90%, and we have about 10% new students. And this isn't really just the attrition of the students, it's new students coming into the program as well. And as discussed, there's some gaps when you start bringing students in that haven't been in a dual language program, have been following along. But with a lack of other options and programs, this is where we end up having students go. And as you follow that across to the right, it goes through first, second, third, fourth. And when we get all the way to 5th grade, where we're looking at students that have remained for those 6 years in the program, 58% of them were there from kindergarten. And really, ultimately, That's who we're fully serving, is 58% of that starting number. And you can also see what the program's doing in terms of bringing other students in, which we talk about a lack of other options, and then how are we able to really stay true to the program and serve it well if we're mixing the student population that it's best designed for in the first place. I think the one that stuck out most for me is in that last 5th grade year, we're still bringing in 15% first-year students into the program. So this is just an example of the data of where the program's really not providing the best for our students and serving our teachers to provide the program as well.
All right, board, we've done a lot of talking. If there are any questions on that first section, which I know there was quite a bit within that, hand it over to the board members.
Regarding the new students that were being brought in, again, we know just anecdotally they're at different levels. Can we just get a little bit of a rundown of like the challenges that are being faced in the classroom by our teachers? Again, and the other students that are in the class, right? If they're having to spend more time, can you guys go into that a little bit for us, please?
We have a pretty diverse variety of students coming in. So we have some students that have very strong language proficiency in their home language, and they're a perfect candidate for a program. We also have some students that have very limited educational experiences, and then they're coming in having to learn 2 languages at a 5th grade level with that content. So it's a pretty diverse variety that we have in our classrooms. So that's all on the classroom teacher to then provide that services and meet students wherever they're at, whether they've had limited schooling or whether they're proficient in their native language.
This is less of a question and more of a comment. When we look at slide 6, the timeline slide, I think there are a couple of important things that are omitted from that slide that bear being brought to light. You know, in my tenure as a board member, every SAR report has shown the opportunity for Hispanic student performance growth. Every single student achievement report. The opportunity or the necessity to improve the programs that we provide for Hispanic students, and particularly multilingual students, were really well documented. If you see me fluttering through papers, in the June 2022 equity report, page 7, page 11, throughout the discussion, if you look at the series of board and admin conversations that happened prior to the November 13 board action, you'll see that there was really an in-depth set of conversations. I want to call those out specifically because the commentary that this board has been consistent with is that it is critically important that any program that we provide provides positive student outcomes for Hispanic students and for multilingual students, regardless of that program's design. The commitment to improving student outcomes has to be at the core of that program. I want to call out the 4th thing that's missing from the timeline, which is that in 2024, in the addendum to Dr. Gordon's contract, there's a very specific performance goal for Dr. Gordon associated with improving student performance for multilingual students and Hispanic students. It's in his contract. It's a specific goal that this board adopted within that contract for administration. So the timeline is incomplete without all of that activity being reflected. And the reason I bring it out is that it is important for us to have the right program that provides positive student outcomes on the table for discussion. And so I think we're getting closer to that presently.
Thank you, sir. I also have not so much a question, but a comment. Something that wasn't brought up is we talk about the mobility of students, and a concern I've expressed in the past is that when we have mobility of students, we're talking about the students that come to us and what are we going to do with them. What I want is a program that's consistent with what they see elsewhere, especially with those mobile students. If they're leaving us and going somewhere else, or they're coming to us from somewhere else, this is a program that's similar to what they've seen somewhere else. Unfortunately, the dual language program, as great as those can be, is not what they're necessarily or likely to see elsewhere. So I'm more supportive of a program that's going to help those students even when they leave us. And we need to always be cognizant of that they are our students when they come to us, and they're our students when they leave.
So the first question I had, and it's relevant to slide 11 or page 11. I'm interested in a couple of the challenges that were identified were relating to leaving the homeschool and the busing impact. What's the percentage of students that are in our one-way dual language that are experiencing that impact today?
We can pull that number for you.
I looked at that for our incoming kindergartners. We can look at that for as a district to determine how many are impacted. If we kind of scale from what happened with our, which would be difficult to do, this is our first time actually giving the entrance criteria of, here's a suggestion based upon the fact that your student's native language proficiency is X. We're recommending that you can, perhaps look at this model, our transitional bilingual education dual language model versus TPI services at your home school. We've not had that opportunity to give that information to parents previously, but we will able to take a look at how many are actually, the lion's share of the students are Richmond-based students. We have a number of students.
And that's their neighborhood school?
That's their neighborhood school. So some students.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that just in terms of representing Anderson. Roughly, there were about 30 Anderson students who would be coming to their neighborhood school at Anderson, but are not. So that makes up about 7% of our school who are being affected and are being transported to a different school.
Okay. The next question, if you could, though, as a follow-up, Dr. Gordon, provide that analysis. The next question I had was, what is in the recommendation, what is the difference between in-classroom and collaborative? Because as I'm looking at the flow chart, those are two different options. So what is the difference?
We'll dive deeply into that in that next session. If you want to give a high-level overview, Tracy.
Yeah, so I want to reference, you have, the glossary there has the terms to help clarify, but for in-classroom, it's related to how the services are provided and who provides them. So in our in-classroom recommendation, the bilingual services would be provided by the classroom teacher who is dual certified as a classroom teacher as well as a bilingual certified teacher. In the collaborative one, like the name suggests, the classroom teacher would be in collaboration with a bilingual resource specialist, and that teacher would not be an in-classroom teacher, but they float between grades and they provide the supports to the grades for native language instruction.
And is that going to look the same whether it's a school with 20-plus native language speakers at the school versus less than 20? Is that going to look the same?
So this model is for any school that has 20 or more students that has that speak the same language. So at Richmond, we will get into that we're going to be recommending in classroom because of the number of students that they have. And at Anderson and Munhall, we'll be recommending collaborative because of the numbers of students that they have. But all three of those schools have over 20 multilingual learners who speak Spanish as their home language.
Okay. And so today, we currently use both TBE and TPI?
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. That's it for now, thank you.
And Mrs. Fairgrave just said, I actually had a similar question during some of our committee meetings, and one of the things that Dr. Taylor had made pretty aware to the rest of us was that there was some inconsistency with the resources as well, and I think that's part of what we're going to be discussing moving forward on some of these slides, the resources with which the students were learning from, and so this will be an opportunity to make that more consistent across the board also. But that's actually one of the exact questions I had too. So.
If I could just, we'll clarify this with more detail, but it's essentially 68 students under the current proposal would be moving back to their home schools. That'd be the number that's not currently being bussed out.
They're being bused today, though?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess I do have one other follow-up, if that's okay. So on page 14, it talks about comparable outcomes and that the study found no significant difference between the one-way and those in the part-time. That must be, that's assuming that the programs are at equal footing in terms of instructional quality and et cetera.
So one of the pieces that we worked with the DM group on was finding that comparable study, because we assumed that we would be looking at other district one-way programs, and there's like, absolutely not. You have to look at other multilingual students within your district who are getting the services. So what they recommended to us was to look at the one-way dual language program and compare it against other native Spanish-speaking services being offered. So for us, we only have one TBE program in our district, so it had to be TPI programming. So different level of services that were offered for students. So, and Mr. Shazar will kind of walk all the way through what that looks like and why that's for us, it's a pretty critical point as the amount of resources in the TPI are different than those in the one-way dual language program. There are more resources in the one-way than there are in the TPI programming.
But I guess what I'm saying, though, I find, and so I want to make sure I'm understanding the intent correctly, I find that statement misleading. And the reason I do is because, you know, I don't know. It could be that there's no academic difference because we have huge gaps in our one-way program, for example, versus the part-time bilingual services. So I'm trying to understand, it sounds like the quality was not really considered. It's really truly looking at the data, academic outcomes.
In this one, it absolutely is. It absolutely is that. And we set that criteria with the board that Mr. Shazar will go over. And when we look at, because we compare the two, does this one move over the 50% of students achieving at this level or this level? So we're really looking at each one as their own category, but seeing if either one were meeting what ISB or others were, or the national average we're saying that we should be achieving at. So that's how we use that comparable there.
It'll come up a little bit later, and with some, maybe there'll be more clarification that'll help the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Other commentary?
All right, with that, let's jump into student outcomes, and Mr. Shazar will walk us through, and then we'll kind of jump right back into questions in this section as well.
Okay. Can you go ahead and move to the next slide? So when we looked at the A-ROI process, the academic success criteria, we were looking at students achieving English proficiency. Dr. Gordon mentioned it's a ISB goal. We need to do that in 5 years. When we look at our dual language program, we begin in kindergarten, which actually is a bonus year for this program because the progress to proficiency with ISB starts in first grade. So the target one is native speaking, native Spanish-speaking students meet their annual progress to proficiency growth target on the Access assessment. So Access is the state test. It is an English proficiency exam. Every student that is a ML student will take it each year. In this case, if a student reaches their progress to proficiency target every year, by that 5th measurable year, they will have received a level of English proficiency. So the next one we want to look at, target 2, is our native native Spanish-speaking students' growth on Access is at or above the national average. We're talking about program evaluation. We want to make sure not only are students getting to it, we want to make sure that target is at least somewhere around the national average and above. So that's an and statement. But we also know that if you reach your national average and growth target, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll reach progress to proficiency in 5 years. In fact, when we looked at the data, I believe it was around 52% of the kids, if all they only did was reach their national average target, we would have about 52% of our students reach their progress to proficiency. So that progress to proficiency target, I apologize, a lot of progress to proficiencies here. That target set by ISB will get us, or will get the students, more importantly, to their English proficiency.
So I want to pause there for a second. Does that make sense? I want it, because if we don't have this foundation, the next part will be a little bit more challenging. So any questions to Mr. Cesar on that?
You say it again, and maybe a little.
Okay. We're going to use the access test. That's our measure of proficiency.
Could you tell us what does that look like? What's the access test actually assess?
So the access test is measuring English, the student's ability, command of English. It does it in speaking, writing, help me out, listening, help me out with the fourth. Listening and speaking. So it's all four of those areas, and then they're combined into a composite score. So ISB takes that composite score in the first year, and the first year the student's in an ML program, or first grade. So kindergarten, we consider a 0 year. You can get a full year of instruction, but we're not taking that access score in kindergarten. So the first year they get that score. Then there is a target score of proficiency, and depending on what year you started and you go, that target score may change, and that's set five measurable years out. So let me give you a quick example. The student comes in kindergarten, joins one of our dual language programs. That's considered a 0 year. And first grade is the baseline year. And second grade is the first time we have 2 access scores we're going to measure against. So in second grade is really the first score. So if you start in kindergarten, it's really about 2/3 of the way through your 6th grade year, which is about 6 2/3 year. Now that actually lines up. So if you start in 5th grade, it's different. So the research will say about 5 to 7 years, with 5 being the target, somewhere in there, is when it's considered reasonable for a student to have acquired English proficiency. So the test measures and looks that way. So each year, if you start at 100 and your goal is 500, you have a 400-point differential. It's dividing that, you're moving on. Each year you get a score, and you might get above 100. Well, your next year might get less because you have fewer points to get to the end. If you don't get to 100, you might have more points to get to the end. So your score will adjust because the goal is by the end of that time, you've reached proficiency. And that's what we're held accountable to against as a school, and I think that's what we want to be held accountable to for our students, reaching that proficiency, and again, in that 5 to 7 year, which is, research tells us, a good target. At the same time, we wanted to look at it in a little different way, and that's the national average. The question is, should our students be growing at least at the national average for the students in their category as they move forward? And the answer was yes. So sometimes one score might be above or below the other, but we set it as it's an and, so we want to make sure you're at least the national average, and you also want to be hitting your progress to proficiency target. So we use those 2 measures. We want to make sure students are reaching those, because if they do, we know we're providing a program that'll get them to proficiency in that target timeline. So then what we did, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, is say what levels or what % of students reaching those are we going to consider to say the program is being successful or not successful. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. I know it's confusing, and I apologize.
No. I just want to be sure that everybody understands, because I think it has an impact for the students when they go back to other schools. Because this will be a measurement that the community may see as a negative. And I think if I'm listening carefully and I understand access and know what this all means, is that our multilingual kids do not become proficient in 1 year.
Correct.
It is a very different kind of assessment than what our kids who are native English speakers. And therefore, the school may look like it's not doing its job when students are progressing at a high rate, or and you're going up and down. So I think that's going to be a component that we're going to need to keep in mind as we talk about students going to back to other schools.
Ms. McCabe, I think you brought up an area that we were talking about measurement and putting this in the SAR and breaking this out, especially if these kids go back to their home schools. We want to see the progress of this, not just mixed in with the school progress. We'd like to see it pulled out separately. And then again, I know we're going to get into the measurements and everything else, but as a board member, I want to see if we're achieving those targets for these students. And I also want to see the school, like how the rest of the school is functioning as well. So I just want to kind of throw that out there to put back to administration. What's the best way that we can possibly do that and view that in the student achievement report?
I think there's one other thing for us to consider, which is that I appreciate the national average as an available data point for us associated with this access test. one of the things that the board has consistently asked administration is to deliver performance for D303 that far exceeds state averages and national averages. The national averages is insufficient in setting up our students for success after D303. Mr. McNally made that point about the future and how they're successful afterward. I think for us, we have to look at certainly the availability of that data point as a measuring stick for us, but the potential to set our own goals as higher than the achievement just of that national average.
So I think it probably would be helpful for people to clarify how that target is set, because I think there's some ambiguity for some people regarding the target versus national average.
Okay, so I'll go back to my example of a student whose first year, let's say they score 100, and let's just say for argument their target's 500. That's their proficiency targets. We have 400 points in there. And at that point from year one, we have 5 years to get those 400 points. So they're going to have the first year, they're going to have 80 points. Every year, your target is 80 points. The national average in year one might be 53 points. In year two, it might be 48 points, depending on your grade level as you progress. So that'll lay out. So then, let's say in your first year, you don't get 80 points, you get 50 points. So you're 30 points behind your growth on that progress to proficiency. Those 30 points are taken and divided among the remaining 4 years, and so that number will go up. Again, the goal is proficiency in English by the end of that time. Let's say the opposite occurs. Let's say in year one, you grow 200 points. So now you're at 300, you got to get to 500. Progress to proficiency, say, great, you got 4 years, we're going to divide it by what's remaining, 200, and that number will begin to drop. So that number varies to ensure that a student will get to their proficiency mark. The national average is just the national average. I shouldn't say it's just, but it's a preponderance of data. WIDA, I think it's 20-some states. There's hundreds of thousands of students in it. And we specifically, in this case, looked at Hispanic students in specific grade levels, and we had an array of data, and we said, okay, each year, whatever that target was, or that average was, I should say, we applied that to the students. So based on the year, based on their grade level, we applied that target. And so what we wanted to say is you have to hit both. Most of the time, progress to proficiency is above it. Some of the time, it can switch. But to your point, we want to make sure as a program evaluation, we want to make sure we're performing and students are growing. So what we did is an and statement. So you have to reach both of them. Again, most of the time, progress to proficiency. As we said earlier, if you hit progress to proficiency every year, you should get 100% of students making it. When we applied the national average, we were at about 52% of the students making it. So we just want to make sure we want to evaluate the program. We want to put the program in the best light. We want to make sure we're providing for our students. And that's how these were set. And I want to be clear, when we look at this, we have 40% attrition. So we have students that aren't here. So we didn't want to look at 60% of our students in the program. So when we look across all those years, we made the decision to say we're going to look each year. So we're not looking at students who have been here for 5 or 6 years at the end. We're looking at students who have been here, that we have 2 scores in our district, or at least beginning of year through the measurement. So you've had time in this district, and that's the measure we're using. So as you notice, we had students move in, and we have students move in and move out. We have students that are here, kindergarten, first grade, may leave for a year, may come back. We have students that leave. We have students that come in. What we said is we want to evaluate the program, so the 2 scores bookending that growth have to be representative of what's happening in the district. So those are the data we used as we looked at this across time.
Does this test, do we apply this test to students, say, that join in 5th grade and then they progress to middle school and high school?
This is a state test, so it's given to every ML student in the district.
Across, even up through high school?
Yeah, so it measures across. It's measuring your English proficiency. So think of it, don't think of it in terms of like, hey, you're at 8th grade. Really, it's from beginning of English proficiency. You score into it. You're at a level, at a place on the scale, and then there's a mark for proficiency. So you could have a newcomer that speaks no English in 9th grade, a new English comes in no English in kindergarten. They're not the same student, but their English proficiency is in the same.
In a couple of slides here too, we're going to, Mr. Chizar had done a great breakdown of both access score, grade level, dual language program versus other programming, and that progress towards proficiency. So, we're using kind of some general examples right now, but I think it's 2 or 3 slides coming up that we're going to actually have the very specific data from our district, and I think that will be enlightening for everyone.
Mr. Kuchert, one additional point to the data. We do have 58% who are persistent students, meaning they're not moving in and out, it seems, from the slide. We probably have the opportunity to, this is a question phrased as a statement, we probably have the opportunity to measure the program effectiveness for those students who do stay as an additional measure to these 2 targets. Is that about right?
We do, and it's not in here anymore, and I apologize, but I will just tell you that it's where we're at with these other measures. We just don't see, we're below 50%.
And if I can just get one more bit of clarity, the 40% mobility or attrition rate, that is over what period of time?
That's from the beginning to end, so kindergarten through 5th grade, which is 6 years.
So, and that I think is where some of the lack of clarity, because we talk about the 5th year, and I think people are thinking 5th year, 5th grade. It's 5th year from when you start.
Yeah, if we could go back to that real quick, just that one. In this case, we are talking about that, because we're looking at the dual, originally we're looking at the TB program in elementary, which is our dual language for Spanish speakers. And so we really looked at kindergarten through 5th grade, and because we're in that range, we're very specific to that group. If we would have looked at first year, wherever they were through other years, we would have looked at this differently. But as this was focused on the program and in the elementary school, this is where we set the data.
I think it's important to recognize that the board has put the access scores to be part of our SAR, and that we are holding everyone accountable to that, because I think it's also important that the parents hear that. We have ignored our access scores in the past, and I think it's critical that we are no longer doing that, and that the community and the parents can see the what we're doing and whether we're meeting those goals. So I appreciate the long time that you took to tell us this, but
It was.
Ready? All right, if we can go down to, I believe it's slide 20. So when we looked at this, we were looking under the A-ROI process. We wanted to come up with some criteria. So we have the measure. We're going to look at it 2 ways. So it's an and. You want to be above both. And what we looked at is if we're at 50% or lower, less than half of our students are achieving the goal. This is really just reevaluate the program. Like, we want to look at this and say, if less than half of our students are doing, we want to really take a big deep dive into this and see what's going on. And that's what happened here. We even broadened it a little bit from the original, just looking at the dual language specifically. If we're between 50 and 79, it's in the modify and improve. It's working for more than half of our students. What can we do to improve it? It wouldn't be kind of starting over. We'd be like taking what we're doing and growing. I think it's fairly self-evident. If we're closer to 50, there's more work to do. And if we're closer to 80, there would be less work to do. And really, if 80% of our students are meeting this, then our core of the program is solid. And that last 20% we're certainly concerned about, but that's less about reevaluating the entire core of what we're doing. That's looking for, why are these students unable to respond to what we're providing for them? And so how would we make adjustments for that 20%? And that's the rationale we came up. And I'm going to affectionately refer to it as the 50-80 rule, because that's what we do. We make up names for stuff. So below 50, it's really a reevaluate. Between 50 and 79 or 80, it's really in that tweak or change. That's where we start. And above 80, it's really about looking at those different groups. So as mentioned on the prior slide, we did not reach the 50% level when we looked at this. If we go to the next slide, please. So when we looked at all multilingual students whose native language is Spanish, and this is all of them. So this is all, and we're looking at our 3-5 students, and we're looking, 3 years. I will tell you, within years, we're not really seeing any differences, but we tried to get a bigger data pool when we did this, and we're at 40.5% of all of our students, multilingual in Spanish, meeting both measures. We're below the 50. When we look at our middle bar is the dual language program, and we're a little bit above that, but we're at 42.6%, so we're still below the 50. And then the students that are not in the dual language program, so this is the opposite of what we just talked about in that all category, we're at 38.2%. So really, when we began looking at the dual language program, we weren't meeting the mark, and as we started looking broader, we're not meeting the mark. We're not providing for our students the ways we want to. And I think that's part of what broadened this and a lot of reconsideration. Through this process, it was, we need to really take a new look at this. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Within that, we wanted to look within it and across it in different ways, and really, I'm going to say the point of this is there something in here working? Is there a group of students it's working for? Is there a way of looking where we're finding success in this? And if you look down the second column, the DL one way, that's our students in the dual language program. Again, we're looking at our elementary Spanish-speaking students in the dual language program. The non-DL are our Spanish-speaking students not in the DL program. And if you go really quickly over to the difference column, we're looking at the differences. And we're not seeing great differences. We are seeing some things like, for instance, dual language, just on progress proficiency in grades 1, 2, we're at 63%. Non-dual language, we're at 52%. As we go through all of these, what we're looking at is an individual score. Remember, it was the and, because if that progress to proficiency dips low, we want to make sure we're still holding a mark that's evaluating the program. And then we did my favorite statistic, the two proportion Z confidence interval, which essentially says I have two proportions of students. So we say you yes, no, made it dichotomous. The yes portion, we look at the end, the amount, and then we do a little test on it, and you can see the p-values there. Significance is set at 0.05. What we're saying is we want to have some assurance that this is really, truly a difference. And across the board, we're not. In fact, the p-values in many of these are very low, which means, next is your point, Ms. Fairgrave, we're not looking at truly studying within programs. We're just saying, based on the two options we give, for everything we do to create these two options, we're just not finding differences. And that's where we sat. And with that, that really goes back to, is this program really providing for our students? I'm going to refer quickly to the access 1 to 1.92. The access levels go from 1 to, I believe the top is 6. For reference, 4.8 is the level of which you achieve. That's considered you've achieved English proficiency, and that's where you become a former ML and we monitor you. So the levels 1 to 1.9 within that would be the least, having the least proficiency in English. A 2 to a 2.9 starts to bring that up. In that 3 level, again, a little bit higher than once you get into 4, you're close enough. And we kept it at those 3 levels. We could see a little bit better. Students are doing a little better the closer they get to English proficiency. But overall, in this category of what we're looking at, we're just not seeing the overall results we wanted. We looked at free and reduced lunch, not free and reduced lunch, looking at different measures of need. And again, between the two programs, we're just not seeing a lot. In our non-DL, not free and reduced lunch, we're doing a little better. And you see that p-value gets close. It's about 86%. We're not quite at the 95, but it's the one that started showing probably the most difference between the two groups. If we want to go to the next slide, please. This is where we're looking at the national average and looking at that measure. Again, we're looking at the dual language. We've got the percent students meeting it, the non-dual language. And without getting into it, I'm really going to focus on that last column where we're looking at are there differences in the program. So we try to look within the program, across the program, look at different measures. Is there something that says this is the thing we want to hang on to, just in terms of is this group of students performing in a different way? And really what we're seeing is we're not seeing differences between the two programs when we look across the different groups of students when we did it this way.
Can I just add on to that? So this is two-pronged then, so we really need to consider if our current full-time TBE program model is not serving our students well, and then we're seeing that our non-dual language students are also kind of performing similarly. We're going to show later on in the presentation how we intend to address both of them, realizing that neither is really getting us at the outcomes that we'd like to at current, and we need to adjust in both ways.
So we go one more slide over. Really, just the end, the one-way dual language program has not met our established criteria. Our program is not serving our student ways we would like to see it. And so that recommendation is to really relook at everything in the program. And then we looked at between the two programs, we're just not seeing differences, as Dr. Taylor just mentioned. And I think that started to broaden our scope of this and looking at really all of our Spanish-speaking students in the ML program and what we're doing to provide for them.
So before we move on, thank you for that, Mr. Chizard. Ms. Fairgrieve, was that kind of along the lines of what you were hoping to see? And are there other questions regarding the last few slides with respect to the data or the p-value or the percent difference? We're basically comparing, the percent difference, if it is a positive difference versus a negative difference, is the frame of reference is back to the dual language program. And then our non-dual language students, was there any questions or clarity, comments?
Yeah, when we looked at this, and I know you guys looked at this not just against the access scores, but against all of our, were there any other differences, or was the data pretty much the same?
We dug into it in our IAR data, that's 3rd through 5th grade. We're seeing some differences. The more you acquire or have proficiency in English, the better the group starts to perform. But really between groups within the program, we're just not seeing the results we'd like to see. I think early on I mentioned the biggest gap. The biggest gap right now is our Spanish-speaking ML students compared to our other ML students or compared to our all group. It really rises as a student group of concern, and I think that's why we're all here tonight looking at programs.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to clarify that you guys looked at this a number of ways, so.
I have a couple questions that may be answered, so you don't have to feel like you need to answer. Somewhere along the line, if you could talk about monitoring after a student, even if it's 3 sentences, so that families know as well as what's the expectation for monitoring. I'm curious if the process that we are using here at 50%, if this is a process we would use for any other program that we might be looking for in the future. I don't need to have that answered right now, but I think that is something that I'd be very interested in hearing. And my third question that, as you're talking, is what do we do about students who come in who are not at the same level as students who've been in the program? How are we going to address students who come in at an older age whose access scores are still low? So whether you answer it tonight or somewhere along the line, I think we still have to look at that.
Tracy, you want to take on the monitoring piece, and then we can come back to others? What does that look like for a student who, I assume what you're saying is once they've hit 4.8?
Right. I know that once you are
access that.
Once you are considered proficient, there's still, I believe, 2 years.
Yes. Yes, so for our students who have reached that proficiency of 4.8 in the overall score, and they are noticed being exited from the multilingual services, we are required to continue to monitor them for, and that monitoring is generally done in collaboration by the classroom teacher as well as the bilingual or the EL resource teacher who has principally been responsible for the language services that the student has been provided. But when the student is no longer receiving those language services, the classroom teacher that the student is now with has conversations with the language resource teacher to find out how the student has done. We have our own data system where we are able to track how our students have progressed, how many years did it take for them to reach that proficiency, and really need to go back and look at that to determine, okay, did this take multiple years beyond the 5 to 7? Did this kind of take 5 to 7 years for the student? But ultimately, we're taking a look at over 2 more years past that exiting. We want to make sure that the students are still secure and having the supports that they need. We need to maintain, at least informally, checking in, and then also we maintain through progress reports that are given at the same amount of times that the report cards are given to check in more formally.
So I'm sorry. Let me just finish here. So the thing that I might want to know more, and you don't need to do it, is if a student is leaving the program at Richmond, moving to another school where they may not have bilingual support, the question would be, how is that monitoring with general ed teachers? also if moving into the middle school, how do we make sure that the monitoring is at the level so kids don't slip? That's the thing we want. We want them to continue. So I just want to be sure we've
So
got an
to
eye on
clarify
that.
about the monitoring, that's for students who have been exited, that's required for us to do that 2-year monitoring. If a student were to move from one school to another school, we would of course make sure that we had the proper opportunity to ask what was the current language level of support that the student needed, what were the resources that were being afforded to the student. But in terms of the official monitoring, that's after a student has exited the program.
That was my follow-up, because more than likely, the students are going to be in middle school during that monitoring period. So is the classroom teacher, is that the English teacher, or how is that working?
So the monitoring is generally, there would be a case manager who's responsible for our multilingual students. So that person would most likely check in with our elementary schools and to take a look at how that student has how they performed on the access test, how that you can check in with the classroom teacher. I think each school, Redling and Thompson, does that a little bit differently. We need to have a district kind of common way of monitoring that as students go from one level to middle to high. But I'd have to get back to look, how do we definitively as a district monitor from one grade band to the next grade band?
Yeah, I think that will be critical, just based, if you were just looking at kind of the math of what's been talked about, the likelihood is the student is going to need to be monitored after they exit the program in elementary. So
Yeah.
I guess we don't have that today?
No.
Okay,
But we can get that for sure.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move into Mr. Attaway's section around cost analysis. This is at fully loaded. So what does it cost?
So the final segment in the analysis is the determination of the total costs related to each of the options being considered. So similar to any financial analysis or projection, we needed to include some assumptions in our work. The first assumption is the rate of growth of multilingual students whose native language is Spanish. We've included that growth in this analysis at 3%, which is more conservative than previous school years, but it is in line with the growth so far this year. The other primary assumption in the analysis is salary increases for the next several years, which we've also included at 3%. And that number is not necessarily to be taken as forecasting future collective bargaining agreements. We really included increases at 3% because that number is equal to the average inflation over the past 10 years. One other point of clarification on the next few slides, we'll be discussing fully loaded costs per pupil. These costs include the direct and indirect costs specific to the program. And when we talk about the budget and the tax levy, we sometimes talk about operating expense per pupil. It's important to know that while the names sound very similar, these are two very different metrics, and they should not be compared or reconciled against each other. So the charts on this slide include the fully loaded cost per pupil for each of the options considered. For each option, we have calculated the implementation cost, which includes any necessary construction, equipment, classroom sets of materials, professional learning for all staff members that work with the program, and the cost to actually develop the program. We have then calculated the run costs, or the cost to operate the program. These costs include all personnel costs, ongoing professional development, replacement equipment and materials, and student transportation. Indirect costs are also a component of these calculations, which include district and building administrator time to implement and oversee the program, and then general district overhead costs, such as IT services, business office, human resources, utilities, custodial, and maintenance expenses. The chart on the left with the gray header are the costs of operating the current one-way dual language program and TPI services across the district. The three charts to the right are the three options that were under consideration for future programming. All options include cost increases when compared to the current program, ranging from an additional $986 per student to $1,491 per student in year one. In all scenarios, the cost per student decreases by year 6 due to some efficiencies in running the program and increases in the projected number of students. Then the charts on this slide look at the same projections in a slightly different way. These charts include the total direct costs, so not broken down on a per pupil basis, with a designation of funding source for implementation costs. The majority of the implementation costs in options 2 and 3 are related to construction expenses for 6 additional classrooms at Richmond. So as we discussed at previous meetings, these models do not allocate the entirety of the construction expenses to the program, since Richmond and other elementary programs could benefit from the addition of the classrooms. We've allocated 25% of the estimated construction costs to these models, which is a proportion that's based on the number of current and projected sections at Richmond. Then beyond construction and furniture, all other direct expenses will be paid from the education fund in implementation and going forward. Are there any questions on the cost analysis?
Can we, when we are looking at moving in option 1, what are we looking at from a space perspective at each of our schools, right? We just went through a redistricting for the whole district. We set our minimum space standards. I'm concerned about your school, and I'm concerned about your school. What does that look like for us?
We will address that one a little bit later.
Okay.
We've got a really nice set of slides that Mr. Buxton
Okay.
and our leaders will address it, if you're good with waiting.
I am. I am. I'm looking at the capital projects too.
I appreciate it.
Can I just offer a comment on the capital projects piece? I think it's important to highlight Mr. Attaway's commentary about how the capital projects cost estimate was allocated to this program, and that it's not 100% of the construction costs that have been talked about for Richmond. In fact, it was only 25% allocated to this specific program. So I think that's the appropriate modeling burden for this program to bear versus any other program. And it shows that 75% of that construction cost, while would be allocated to Richmond and would benefit that school, is not this specific program.
Well, that's a good point, Mr. Lackner. I think that piece of it is something that we've talked about at the table before, and it's unfair to place the whole burden of that on the program itself. So it's a good call out.
And
I guess I can wait.
And I assume, I'm going to assume Mr. Lackner's usual question about where will we end up having to cut in order to make programs work, but we don't need to talk about that tonight. I do believe we have a business services meeting where we can go into it more in depth, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to help us with that.
Okay, we can move on from this. Now moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth. We're going to give you some school schedules, a day in a life. Our principals are going to get the opportunity to speak, Mr. Buxton and others. So with that, Mr. Buxton, you're going to kick us off.
Absolutely. So just as Dr. Gordon said, we're now going to examine our program model recommendation in significantly greater detail. We're going to establish a vision for the program. We're going to look at the types of supports we believe the program needs for our students to be successful. We're going to look at sample schedules, impact on space, and go into some sample draft success criteria, both from an implementation phase, also from an academic phase. And like I said, we started with a vision for our multilingual program. And obviously there are a few concepts up here bulleted: actively acquiring English proficiency and academic content knowledge. And we feel that is so critical for the vision of our programming, because that is going to allow our students to be successful in the core academic content areas.
Okay, so before we go into the student support that will be allocated by school, we want to just kind of clarify the language and the locations and our kind of rationale behind that for where these multilingual services would occur. So if a student's home school was at Richmond, which we've said that the majority of our current students in the dual language program do have a homeschool of Richmond, they would remain at Richmond and they would receive what we're calling in-classroom, or you saw in previous slides, self-contained transitional bilingual education services. This model is consistent with what we currently offer in our dual language program in that the students are self-contained. It's not a collaborative program. Go back. Okay. If your homeschool is Anderson or Munhall, students would return to Anderson and Munhall to receive collaborative transitional bilingual education services. So again, the difference here being that in collaboration with the teacher who's not a classroom teacher, but who is still a certified bilingual teacher, would provide that native language instruction as needed to support students in leveraging what they know in their home language into English. If your homeschool is Davis, for a number of reasons that I think we'll get into a little bit later regarding a couple of things, space as also belonging for our students, those students would remain at Richmond to receive those multilingual services. And then for our multilingual students whose Spanish is not their native language, they would return to their homeschool for ESL services, which is consistent with what we currently offer at all of our other schools that do not have the full-time TBE, have those TPI services there. Are there any questions about that before?
I just have one question regarding the students who have Davis as their home school and will attend Richmond. Is there, I'm assuming that much of that has to do with, and it may be answered later, but I'm assuming much of that has to do with the fact that that's kind of the programming they've been within to this.
So yes, so they've been cohorted together for a while. There's also space implications that we'll go into.
Right. Now, is that something that kind of over time would be sunsetted out, or?
So over time, we would need to look at for who's a Davis student, are they a needing full-time TBE services? Right now, we wanted to honor that these students have been, again, cohorted together, but moving forward, we would need to look at who would benefit from the full-time TBE program and would thus need to go to Richmond as opposed to a student who does not need that, and that's based on that native Spanish proficiency.
Right, yeah, no, and I wouldn't want to pull somebody out of a program that they've been in so far, so.
Thank you.
Okay, through our work with the DM group and academic return on investment, it really required our team to re-examine not only our recommendation we made to the board, but also how we were going to be supporting the staff within our multilingual programming. This slide shows a breakdown of staffing allotments for our programming recommendation. A key at the bottom shows how the positions are coordinated within current staffing, projected staffing, and proposed staffing. So as you see, any of the roles in black, those are roles that are currently assigned to those schools for our current year, 24-25. Any of the roles that are highlighted in green, those are roles that are currently in our buildings serving our students, but they are going to need to be reallocated either in a different role or to a different building. And then finally, you see positions that are highlighted in red, and those indicate new staff recommendations needed to support the programming model. Been pretty upfront about that, needing to really invest in this program and invest in this model, and that does come out to us recommending an increase of 8.5 staff members across the 3 buildings. Next to each school, you will also see a number of multilingual students in each of our schools projected for next year's enrollment. Based on the staffing recommendations for each school, you will also see a student-to-staff ratio that shows we have really tight comparisons between these 3 schools and what that ratio looks like. There are a couple of roles I want to specifically speak to. One of those is the bilingual resource specialist. So you're seeing the bilingual resource specialist in different quantities show up across the 3 schools, with recommending 3 at Richmond and 3 at Anderson. This is going to be critical for that part of a student's day where they get their native language support in the core academic areas. So when you look at Anderson, for example, we have the staffing where a bilingual resource specialist would be able to support roughly 2 grade levels, working with the building principals and the teams to align those schedules to make sure that when times are appropriate to get support in Spanish with math instruction, with ELA instruction, with science, that we have those bilingual educators who are able to work with small groups and work flexibly with students to give them that native language support during their core academic areas. The role would look very similar but differently nuanced at Richmond, with Richmond being an in-classroom TBE model. The classroom teachers would be bilingual. However, they would still have the opportunity for the bilingual resource specialist to partner with classrooms to differentiate. Again, you're in that in-classroom classroom makeup, you're going to still have a variety of language needs. Some students who are well on their journey to English proficiency, and some that are at the early stages of that English proficiency. So the bilingual resource teacher coming in to support that classroom teacher in that differentiation and small group support. I also wanted to pull out the STEM multilingual paraprofessional. That is a newer role that we're recommending with our STEM educators now delivering science content, and knowing that students that are qualifying for these services, getting support within that native language in the core content areas. STEM now meets that criteria because they are delivering science content. And so having a multilingual paraprofessional assigned to support that transition of language. As we've said, STEM is very content-based, vocabulary-based, background knowledge-based, and so having that educator in those classrooms to support students, we think, is paramount. You're gonna, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add that we are recognizing that that would be a heavy lift for our multilingual paraprofessionals, and we have scheduled professional learning to support them with the classroom teachers. And how do we best support students in that role? What does that look like beyond providing translations? How do we help students kind of have access to that content knowledge and what the STEM teacher is delivering, making sure that they know multiple ways and strategies to help make that accessible for students?
Before you go on, Mr. Buxton, on this slide 33, are all of the headcount additions and the professional learning to help make those professionals effective in the classroom incorporated in the budgets that Mr. Attaway shared on slide 28 and 29?
Yes.
Thank you.
For these newer roles, do we have any concerns about acquiring teachers with those certifications, those skills? Is there anything that we need to be watching for with this?
So I would say that given the fact that we have just a few roles that are actually going to be new roles, and the majority of the reallocations, that we're in a pretty good position. The positions that we have that we'll be putting up for new staff would be ones that have existed for a long time. They're not like, nuanced new positions. So other districts have EL resource teachers, other districts have bilingual resource specialists with those certifications.
So we already have staff in mind for the ones that we're moving in?
Yes, so the ones that are in green would be a reassignment, and so that's their choice to
Right.
select or not to take that position.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So can you just give like a real-life example, I guess, for the 3 bilingual resource specialists for Richmond? So that would be a bilingual resource specialist that's at another building that they're going to be asked to relocate. How is
So
that?
I could answer that right now. So currently, we have 12 dual language teachers in our district. So 6 of those would be in-classroom teachers at Richmond, and then out of the other 6, 3 would be at Richmond and 3 would be at Anderson, and then we would add 1 at Munhall. So they're currently a dual language teacher, but they have that bilingual certification, and so there'll be that extra support to help we're thinking 2 grade levels, but of course we could be responsive with that, but 2 grade levels to help that, either that collaborative model or at Richmond to that in-classroom model.
Okay, and so on that note then, because we are hiring bilingual resource specialists as well, are they going to be expected to have the same criteria in terms of credential?
Yeah, they will
Yes.
need to be certified bilingual.
Okay, thank you.
And the only other item I wanted to pull out from this slide is you do see we are looking to add a math specialist for each one of our 3 buildings. And although the intent of the math specialist in this recommendation is for this role to be able to work with all students and staff of these 3 buildings, Tina is going to take some time to go into more depth on the next few slides about kind of the rationale behind the math specialist ad.
Jared and team, can we go back to the previous slide? I just want to appreciate you guys for this, right? We've looked at the outcomes, right? And we're seeing, some of this stuff. I really appreciate that there's an acknowledgement here that we were understaffed in this and we're not serving it right. And we heard a lot, and I know Paul's heard from me a lot about making sure that we have the correct staffing at Richmond, so the community doesn't have to go through, kind of the same thing that led to the previous issue. So I really want to take just a second and appreciate this slide and actually having the team having looked at what we need from a staffing perspective.
I'm going to add that when way back when this whole Richmond-Davis thing kind of started, there were widening gaps at that point as well, and we started to plug those gaps specifically with math specialists in the building, and I'm glad to see they're returning because we need them there.
Thank you, Mr. Lenz. So that's a perfect segue for me to talk about our math specialists. We've talked a lot tonight about progress towards English proficiency, but if you think about the second part of that is the academic content. It's not only about English proficiency, but math content is also one of the gaps that we're trying to fill at this time. So when we think about math as academic content knowledge, that's knowledge that's learned simultaneously with language for each student. And the math specialists are the supports in the buildings that will do that work. If we go back and center this conversation on our Chapin Hall report, we acknowledge that this is the biggest gap in our district. It's not only in ELA and English proficiency, but it's also in mathematics. That report also highlighted that for our multilingual students who speak Spanish, their gaps in mathematics actually increase over time. So that if we don't set those students up for success by the end of elementary school, their trajectory for mathematics is poor in our district. We also saw in that report that proficiency on IAR and iReady was highly predictive of success in high school to be college and career ready. So that we know we have the right measures in our district, and we know that with support by math specialists, we can work on that goal to make our students proficient in mathematics before they leave elementary school. The research on early number knowledge predicting later math achievement is so strong that foundation is critical for our students. We want to have every student in the district have the opportunity to not close any doors, including STEM careers for students. So when we talk about our math specialists are not instructional support coaches. They provide both direct services to students and also coaching support to teachers. And that's important because when we think about the students that we want to serve in this model, our Spanish-speaking ML students are overrepresented in our low-income group, and poverty matters when we think about our learning outcomes for our students. So our math specialists can support those specific language and math needs of students in these schools. We're going to add math specialists to Monhall, Richmond, and Anderson. Those are also schools that have a higher percentage of students in that low-income group. But in addition to that, our math specialists can provide students services to students, also the English-speaking students, the monolingual students in these schools. Those schools, Richmond and Anderson, have an opportunity gap. They have less students qualify for AT math services and also accelerated math pathways. By providing additional math support, that math specialist can also serve the monolingual students in the school by providing above grade level access and also enrichment opportunities. So I'm going to go on to talk about that special role. That math specialist is that 2-for-1. Not only do they provide intervention and acceleration to services to all students, they provide classroom support, small group support, and also pull-out support. So those are direct services provided to students. In addition to that, they also work in the most effective way with teachers as a job-embedded professional learning partner. We know that the effect size for supporting teachers with Tier 1 core instruction is the greatest professional learning effect size for educators. We also know that from experience in our district this year with our PLC model, when our math specialists are working together with the PLC group, they are able to be that math supporter because our math specialists have a very unique skill set. Not only do they have deep content knowledge of mathematics, but they also understand the learning progression from kindergarten through middle school, and that's a perspective that maybe a third grade PLC leader or teacher might not have. So they're a very important part of our strategic priorities of collaborative, effective collaboration, and also instructional coherence. And then the third role that will support this work and has been very pertinent to our conversation tonight about program evaluation is that our math specialists lead the data analysis of the math data and student achievement outcomes in the building. And not only do they support the building leadership team, they also support individual PLCs and individual teachers as they analyze their own data, and they contribute and implement the school improvement plan at the school. So you can see that our math specialists are a critical part of our improvement plan and also to remediate those achievement gaps that we see in our district because learning math content is also learning an academic language.
Thank you for that. We also recognize that in the coming months that we are going to have a presentation on high school experience. We had a very specific conversation on math, on the math specialist, and ensuring that we saw the bridging between this work here to our high school experience, and specifically our math experience work that we're doing. As Ms. King said so eloquently, that when our fifth grade students are not achieving by fifth grade, their opportunity gap significantly widens from other students. So we see this as a direct link to the high school experience in this area for our students across the board. The other piece that I would highlight for the math specialist is this conversation around what is the math specialist doing in other schools that, quite honestly, is not occurring in schools like Richmond, because we're spending more time in interventions for this role, and in schools that are different than Richmond, they're spending some time in Richmond or in intervention and other time in enrichment. Our students at Richmond, Munhall, and Anderson deserve those same opportunities for our students across the board. They deserve the enrichment, they deserve the interventions. Where are they at? So that's a real significant change in the thinking, as opposed to fully in the intervention world, as opposed to where are our students who are showing these great opportunities to be mathematicians, to be scientists, to really lean into that STEM world and highlighting them. So I'm excited about that, but I wanted to make a clear connection and bridge from our work here to work that is occurring within the high school experience, specifically math. Anything else that I missed on that? Here. I got to hear.
Dr. Gordon,
I had a follow-up question. I think it would be helpful for the board and really probably even the community to be able to look at side by side each elementary school and how we're stacked in terms of resources and supports.
We can bring that for you.
Because I'm not suggesting that everything has to be 100% equal, but I think we need to be intentional in understanding why we have additional resources at Richmond, for example, versus another elementary school.
Absolutely.
And just to
Mr. Green.
clarify, every elementary building has a math specialist now,
Correct,
correct?
but I hear what you're saying. We'll bring
Yeah,
that for
I'm
you.
talking about all,
Yep.
the whole.
Oh,
all of it.
I was going to piggyback on that and fold it in. I know we'd previously asked for, we came up with the building staffing models with the programs and everything else. I'd love to see that readout, versus where we started to where we are and where any gaps are at.
We got that for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Buxton, oh no, we're over here now.
All
Lisa?
right, so what does it look like? So I have the opportunity to talk about what it looks like at Richmond. So currently, there are 2 sections of dual language per grade level for the district program right now. And since we are keeping over 50% of the students who qualify for TBE services at Richmond because they live in the Richmond boundaries, we actually have enough students for a whole entire section, and that's why we're calling it that in-classroom. So right now, the class makeup for grades K to 5 for the in-classroom model will include Spanish-speaking students from Richmond and Davis, and that will be taught by a certified bilingual teacher, just like it is now for dual. So in terms of that, there's not much difference. However, what is different is we will now have the same curriculum, and we will be able to collaborate, have effective collaboration, build collective efficacy across that grade level. So there'll be 3 sections now per grade level. We'll have one of those in-classroom sections, and then we'll have 2 monolingual sections. So they'll be able to PLC together effectively, and that's really exciting, that opportunity. One of the other main differences is the language of instruction and allocation. So literacy and math will initially be taught in English with that same core curriculum resource. However, there will be opportunities for small group differentiated instruction in English and Spanish. And what's so great about this model is we're not going to say, yes, it's Spanish every day, it's English every day. We're going to say it's what you need. So if a child needs Spanish, they're going to get it, and it's offered on a daily basis. And I think it's important to know that currently how it works is maths and English. There are some opportunities for bridging at certain parts, but not necessarily on a daily basis. And literacy, how it works is there's cycles of instruction. So there may be a 3 to 5 week cycle in English currently, and then a 3 to 5 cycle in Spanish currently. Well, with what we're saying in our model is let's give that core instruction in English using Wonders, a guaranteed and viable curriculum that everyone is using district-wide, that we have an L&T team to support, that we have PLCs that could collaborate together. And then when a child needs it, let's use that small group time to provide that support if a child needs it and they have access on a daily basis. And we could build background knowledge. We could pre-teach vocabulary. There are so many things that we could do during that time. And we're going to talk about all the professional learning opportunities that are going to come with this so we know what to do during that time and how to do it. But it just allows for daily Spanish instruction for students that need it. And that is a huge difference than what we have right now that we're really excited about having. And then who's going to give this? To put it only on a classroom teacher, we know is a big ask. However, we do have at Richmond a certified bilingual teacher who can provide that support. But if you also notice, back to Mr. Buxton's slide, all of those extra green, we have 3 additional certified bilingual teachers to help teach that small group instruction. But then in addition to that, we're also adding an EL teacher. So we'll have 3 English language teachers at Richmond as well to help to provide support for the monolingual classrooms, help provide that English support so we can keep on moving kids in the right direction. And so then what does it look like on a daily basis? Yeah.
Kind of
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, you're doing fabulous.
I'm just going
Thank you.
on and on.
First of all, I think it is excellent to hear that the curriculum will be consistent. Okay, I don't know that we collectively had an understanding gaps in that today.
We had you wait till the end for that.
So that's unfortunate, but I appreciate that we're closing that. My follow-up question is, when it comes to our weekly check-ins driven by the PLC or our assessments or any of that, those are going to be consistently given in English across. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And right now, they are given in English as well. And we do have some criteria that we go through, a very strict protocol for maybe a student that just came to us, where they would have the opportunity to take something in Spanish, and we would continue with that on an as-needed basis. But English is the language of instruction. English is the language of assessment.
Okay, and do we track that then, when we're making the exception and the students taking the same test but in Spanish? Do we have a control around that?
I can
or-
tell you it's it's a handful of students. It's a very small handful of students. And that's also depending on what they need. So like, if they have a lot of skills in a certain topic, they're gonna take it in English, right? So it gets very on an as-needed basis, how we use it. I don't know if Dr. Taylor wants to add.
Yeah, we do track that, so it's not, we have that known, who are the students for whom we need to provide that native instruction and that native assessment for. That's generally our students who are newcomers, but I qualify that as saying that all newcomers are limited, at different language proficiency. So for our students who have, are at the beginning levels of English proficiency and our newcomers would be those students that we would afford the opportunity to take that in Spanish so we can see what they know and have.
I just think it's important to be sharing that data, especially as we're going to be reporting access results and other performance metrics. It's important to understand the context, I think, around that data.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Take us through a day in the life.
Sure. So a day in the life. So one thing I wanted to point out with this is when we have that same curriculum, we have phenomenal teachers who work really, really hard and they want to do what's best for kids. And this just allows us to work together to achieve that goal because we have the same curriculum, we're having those same conversations. And so anything that's highlighted in yellow just indicates when instruction is in English. So whether you're monolingual, whether you're in the in-classroom, or whether you're going to be a collaborative over at Munhall or Anderson, you're going to have English instruction in a lot of those core subjects. So you're going to start your morning meeting together in English. We'll build culture and community. And then math, that core block Eureka Squared, that core lesson is going to be done in English as well. And then the reading and writing, we're going to use Wonders, and we're going to have that core whole group lesson in English as well. Specials are in English with the exception, well, it's still in English STEM, but right now the classrooms kids who need those full-time services, they go to STEM, which is a pretty high content in science content that they're trying to learn, and it is all in English. So the difference is adding that MLP to help provide that support as needed is going to really help make that more accessible for our students. And so the difference is those areas in green on the schedule are opportunities when students who require full-time services can get those services. So during number talk time, it's a perfect time where we could differentiate. We could provide that Spanish instruction for that time of the day. Math small group. We might have students who could benefit from building background knowledge in Spanish or bridging vocabulary that might be used and just leveraging that native language. That could be done during that math small group time. And who's doing that? Well, at Richmond, we have a certified bilingual teacher who can provide those services. But we also have 3 additional bilingual resource specialists because we know just needing Spanish, there's a variety of different levels and needs that we have. And Dave was talking about access scores. Well, we use those regularly at the building level, and we use the WIDA can-do descriptors, and we know our kids that are at 1s or 2s or 3s, and we know what they need to do to get to that next level. And so by having that staffing available, we're able to differentiate better and be more responsive to all of our kids. Because think about it, if you have a group of 12, and there's 8 different levels in that group of 12 versus a group of 4, and there's 2 different levels, what can you do? How can you meet their needs better? Like which one? It's pretty obvious. So another great thing about this is the times in English, because it's that core resource, one of our goals is to provide integration as much as we can in authentic ways. And so by having that same core resource, we can have students share across a grade level and reach and have the same high academic expectations for them and give them opportunities to be with English-speaking peers. And we just have those opportunities with a schedule like this. And it just really puts a structure in place for us to be more successful.
And I'll just add that really the real importance of the number talk time, aside from the fact that is another opportunity for students to get that instruction in Spanish, it's also time for students to get talking. So oracy oftentimes precedes students being able to show what they know from a literacy standpoint in terms of their reading and their writing. So if I can just get a chance to talk about what I'm learning, what connections I'm making, that time is really vital for students to bridge what they can tell you and then show you from a literacy standpoint.
Any questions about Richmond before I hand over the mic?
All right. Thanks, Lisa. So what is it going to look like at Anderson and Munhall? First and foremost, we get to welcome our students home. We get to welcome. They're going to get to ride their bikes to Anderson with their buddies that they play at the park with. They're going to get to be on the same soccer and basketball teams and baseball teams with their neighborhood friends and with the same kids that they'll get to go to school with. So we are going to welcome our students home. I don't think it's certainly not, I don't want to minimize that in this plan. So again, at Anderson and Munhall, this is the collaborative model. All right, that's one of those terms that we're learning tonight, that collaborative model. So we will, of course, welcome our students back and in very strategically using their access scores and their Spanish proficiency levels, cluster them and group them into throughout the grade level. So if we have 3 third grade classrooms, we will intentionally cluster them throughout those three grades as needed. And then, and that will of course happen at Anderson and at Munhall. The language of instruction will be in English for those core subjects. However, very similar to what Lisa described, some of that differentiation, some of that small group support will happen throughout the day, and I'll show you in just the next slide, will be able to happen in Spanish as well. So they will get, that goal of English proficiency will be our target, but in order to get that, we will be supporting them, instructing them in English, but strongly supporting them at their level in Spanish as needed. And of course, the additional staff, those bilingual resource specialists, in addition to the additional multilingual paras, are significantly increasing our current that staff to student ratio. It is not just supporting our new students we're welcoming back, but it's supporting all of our students at school and our current 60 ML students. So we are welcoming 30 back, but roughly we currently have 60. So it really will increase the rigor and the amount of support that we can provide students, in addition to enrichment opportunities as well. So what will it look like at Anderson? So as you can see, just on that left column, that's just a typical day for any student, welcoming everybody in the arrival. This is just a random day. It could be, these of course could be in different orders, but they got math, they head off to specials, their reading chunk, their small group of reading, of course, everyone's favorite, lunch and recess. Let's not minimize that. Of course, our E&I So our current services that we have are that center yellow column, and we are clustering students right now. We intentionally look at their access scores. We know those students well, and as we build our rosters each school year, it's what we've been doing for years. We intentionally cluster them so we can utilize our current staff to support them as best we can throughout the day in primarily in their in reading and writing and their ELA, but as staff is available, also in math and in small group areas. But a lot of those are provided by our current EL teachers and our one multilingual para. But as you can see in the green column, with the TBE collaborative model, we will be able to provide a lot more of that Spanish instruction as needed. As we've pointed out, not every single student needs everything in Spanish, but the ones that do, because we know they do, because we'll know them and their needs, we will be able to have that in small group settings and supported in the classroom with the multilingual paras and or with bilingual resource specialists. So a lot of that is those small groups pulling out a and they just got an amazing wonders lesson. They just read an amazing text with their classmates and their buddy from the soccer team. Then, if needed, they're going to get to be pulled out with a bilingual resource specialist to enhance and give that small group Spanish instruction if needed to reinforce that. Now, their monolingual friend, the other guy on the soccer team, he may be a monolingual student who also needs some small group. He is getting that possibly in the classroom with his monolingual teacher. So this is what we do. We find out what kids need. We build schedules intentionally with how we stagger groups, how we stagger grades, so that we can maximize the resources we have with staffing to get them throughout the day.
Can I just add a clear? Oh, you want to go ahead, Ms. Fairgreen?
What's the ratio that you're expecting student to bilingual resource specialist? If that makes sense, because if they're going to cover 2 grade levels, and there's a lot of area
Yeah.
for them potentially to cover. So what did you base, the 3 FTE or, at
Yeah.
Anderson, there's 3 FTE that's going to
Yeah.
be staff. So what's the ratio for that?
Great question. I don't know if I can speak to exactly the ratios. What I can speak to maybe is the essence of your question, or do we have enough people to do this?
Yeah.
So that's a great question.
So our current
Yeah,
ratios, our current ratio, we try to keep it at 30 students to 1 ML teacher or multilingual resource teacher. So their caseload is generally around 30. Some of our resource teachers have more than that. Some have less than that at Anderson. Mr. Jarrett said there's 60 multilingual students, and there's currently 2 EL teachers, so that puts them at a 30 to 1. But we try to keep it at that, but some are higher and some are lower at each school.
And is that the same ratio? Because there is there's an EL resource, there's 2, an Anderson EL resource teacher, and then we have the bilingual resource specialist. So are those going to be used interchangeable? Or I guess I'm just trying to understand.
So kind of that the bilingual resource teacher can do what the EL resource teacher can do, but the EL resource teacher can't do what the bilingual one because they don't have the Spanish. So we can utilize the bilingual resource specialist to support where the full-time TBE is going on and where students need that native instruction. We can utilize our EL resource teachers to support our other ML students who need some additional support in their language acquisition, but not necessarily that they need Spanish support.
Okay. I guess my thought is at some point, I think it would be helpful to understand exactly how we're staffing this to students. For each of these areas. And the 8.4 to 1, like student staff ratio at Anderson, is that using all the staff to come up with that? So all the staff that's listed there compared to the total 97?
Correct.
Okay.
I can't speak to the ratio part, but I did want to let you know that there was, Dr. Gordon let a group of us principals get together and look at what a schedule would look like for Anderson, for Richmond, for Munhall, to see when we had that slide with the green and the black and the red on it. So we didn't just guess, like, this is the schedule, this is what we would need to make this work happen, this is how many staff we would need to do it. And so we sat and did those mock schedules just to make sure that it would work. So does it work to have 1 person at 2 grade levels supporting a math block, a number talk block, and an ELA small group? And yes, we could fit that in. And that just wanted to let you know that was something we did.
Thank you.
And we also looked at it by how many students at each grade would need that, so we can't just make the assumption that kinder and first would be supported by the same bilingual resource teacher, because those students might have more students that need the Spanish because they're earlier on in their acquisition of English, so we need to be able to stagger that, and we looked at that as well.
Okay, and I would like to have an opportunity to talk about what do services look like at the other buildings. I also want to call out this slide as a little misleading, because to be clear, there is TPI at Anderson, Richmond, and Munhall as well. So just because they're running full-time TBE services, we have TPI in all 11 of our buildings. For example, not all of our multilingual learners at these 3 schools are Spanish speaking. So if you have a student speaking Arabic, they are going to be receiving TPI services. But again, for these other 8 schools that we're going to be talking about now, again, these are schools that don't qualify for full-time TBE. So these are students or talking anywhere from 3 to 5 students per grade level. But again, the principal and their team, they're going to look at the students, their skills, their English proficiency, and be very intentional about where they place them across the grade level. Again, the instruction is absolutely going to be in English. And then our EL resource teacher, and all of our buildings have EL resource teachers. That doesn't mean they're bilingual. In fact, many of them are not, but they have that training and certificate to learn how to best teach language acquisition, partner and collaborate with teachers to elevate their ability to incorporate visuals and things in their classroom. But the EL resource teacher would be providing the support through literacy and math. a typical day in a TPI model. Again, you're going to see the day broken out. We're going to really focus on the math time, whether it's the number talk, the math fluency, the core, reading, writing, whole group, small group. But these are times, again, based on classroom makeup and based on language need of the students. The EL resource teacher has some flexibility of whether to co-teach with the classroom teacher. That is a model that is used where you have two teachers teaching in a math block, or portions of that math block, and then the EL resource teacher pulls the student for additional time in small group in the classroom. And there are also models where the EL resource teacher might pull the student out of the classroom to get some of that additional language support. I just want to take some time here, knowing that as I've shared the vision of the program that we're recommending, something that has come up along the way is the importance of biliteracy. So we wanted to specifically showcase what some of our options are for our students as they transition into the middle school and high school to make sure they can keep that Spanish language prevalent and putting them on a path for testing for and achieving the seal of biliteracy. So if you start with middle school, there are options to have co-taught or bilingual social studies courses in grades 6 through 8. Also, starting in 7th grade, students can take a high school level world language course. So you see there in 7th grade level 1, that is a high school level course. And if they persist through that, students by 8th grade could take that second level of Spanish, getting them into the high school with 2 high school credits. As you go over to the right side of the slide and look at the course offerings at the high school, they do have courses set up for Spanish for heritage speakers. And by the student's sophomore year, they might be taking AP courses. And again, students can test for the seal of biliteracy at any point, 9th through 12th grade, but wanted to make sure we're pointing out some of the different pathways that our students would have to continue to be a part of those heritage language courses. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Lentz. So we're going to now talk a little bit about space impact. And obviously, based on the number of students that are currently being served in the dual language program, it is going to have an impact. So my goal here on this slide is to kind of methodically walk through the implications at each one of these 3 schools when it comes to space standards and other types of considerations that are going to need to be made. When you look at Anderson, as Mr. Jarrett indicated, the recommendation would welcome back approximately 30 students, again, spread across 6 different grade levels. And based on their current enrollment at that grade level and how many students are coming back from the dual language broken down by grade level, we're very confident that Anderson will go up 1. It's probable they will go up 2 core classrooms by welcoming the students back. So there are certainly going to be some considerations that will need to be made in order to not compromise the integrity of those minimum space standards. Some of those considerations include special education programming, also looking at current room usage, cohabitants, the flexibility of that space. But should this recommendation be approved, it'll be something that will lead to conversations to make sure that the space is there at Anderson to meet the space standards, but also be able to respond to what this model looks like. It requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of small group work, and things of that nature. As we pivot over to Munn Hall, they're welcoming between 15 to 19 students back. And the way that the breakdown is, we're very confident they'll go up a section, one core section. You see there in the breakdown of the classrooms, they still have 3 repurposed classrooms available. So I do not see the space standards being compromised at Munn Hall. And then at Richmond, I think the thing to talk about Richmond, on the surface, you're going to say, okay, they currently have 6 classrooms of their 21 dedicated to 3-5 dual. This recommendation would have an in-classroom for every grade level, 6-6. It's an equal swap. I think the thing I would just bring forward is, Richmond's always had issues and concerns with auxiliary space. It is one of our smaller buildings that was built a time ago. And so when I say auxiliary space, I want to be sure and be clear what I mean. Office spaces, conference spaces, flexible spaces for pull-out small group. And so although the number of core classrooms needed at Richmond doesn't change in our recommendations, we will need to make some considerations about this space, because not only will we be adding staff, as you saw on that slide, but we'll be adding a programming model that's really predicated on collaboration and flexibility of how we're working with our students.
So, Mr. Buxton, I'm sorry, just real quickly. One of the things we talked about during planning was that it appears the strain will primarily be at Anderson. We'll be able to make some things work at these other institutions. Can we talk a little bit about whether you anticipate that challenge to remain, wane as time goes on, increase as time goes on based off projected enrollment?
Would you like me to speak specifically to Anderson, or?
I think that's the one that we're seeing the biggest space constraints, unless, the rest of the board would like to hear more about the other areas. So just what you anticipate moving forward, if that will be a challenge that's ongoing or will subside.
Yeah, the thing we're seeing about Anderson, first and foremost, it's the only boundary that didn't change. So we have years worth of data. We did our 7-year study last year in preparation for the boundaries. And so with it being the only boundary that didn't change, we have a pretty good idea of the move-in, move-out rate. And what we're seeing with Anderson is Anderson doesn't have a significant gap between like its biggest grade level and smallest grade level. Like water's finding its level, kind of always being around like, ooh, is it gonna be a 4-section? Is it gonna be a 3-section? So some of those things are hard to forecast, but the thing I would say about Anderson is Nate's probably listening to me talk about Richmond's auxiliary space, and he's probably like, completely agreeing. I do think that some space issues and considerations will need to be made annually with regards to Anderson. I do.
Just finishing the thought on Anderson, I have a concern around that. Like, I know, and I appreciate you pointing out the boundary. That's the one that didn't change, right? In our next business services meeting, can we come back with some options to, get it so that it is at our minimum space standards? That would be great to have that as an agenda item for our next business services. Next, I do want to switch to Richmond. And I think Jared, you talked a bit about the meeting spaces, the collaboration spaces, everything else. We had originally looked at Richmond for the additional classrooms, right? Because we know it is our only undersized building left in our elementaries. I would like to ask that you guys come back next business services for what we need at that. I know we're not going to get necessarily to, we don't need to get to, or sorry, not need. We need to get what we need in order for this program to be successful, and then also for the rest of the students at Richmond. I don't want a situation where we're art on a cart, where we're cramming stuff in, where now the additional staff that we're hiring there doesn't have a place to perform their PLCs, everything else. So that would be my ask for additional item on business. And then the last question, which those were not really questions, those were more statements and agenda items. The mobiles at Davis, do you need those? Are we able to kind of keep what we were hoping to do and get rid of them, or is that a future?
If the board moves this plan forward, then yes, those mobiles would be removed, yes, at the end of this school year.
Okay.
But we have some, as you said, we'll talk about some other space constraints that we're seeing. One of the conversations last Tuesday, I was over with Lisa at Richmond, speaking with the staff. Overall, it was a good, healthy conversation. But what was absolutely clear at the very end of the meeting were the teachers expressing their concerns about not having additional space. Everything that Mr. Buxton said was true and was absolutely echoed by our educators at Richmond. Lisa, Nikla, everybody made sure that We understood where we're at there. We have some thinking, that's about it. But we will bring that forward to the board, engage Mr. Attaway, Mrs. Stuber, and others in that conversation as to what that could look like. So we'll be bringing that forward at that business services meeting.
Okay. How many of these space conversations are reflected in the budget number? Slide 28 and 29.
The only one that we would, as we're considering it right now, would be the Richmond conversation, but that hasn't been included into, as we saw Richmond in that first year construction. That is not reflected in this conversation or in those numbers that Mr. Attaway had on his sheets. But once we start, we have some more work to do with Amanda and Justin to really think about what that looks like. Potentially, we can give some numbers at that business services meeting that would reflect very similar to how he's organized his current cost allocations.
Mr. Lackner, I'm expecting slide 29 to get modified. Services meeting, and when we do present that, I would like to see a redo of slide 29 with any additional updates in it, the costs.
Can we go back just a little bit, because we ended on space here, but I want to go back to the other schools and the biliteracy. Let me just say, I was very excited at the possibility of two-way in this, dual language in this district. Having been in the community in the district for a while, I did not think we could ever do it. And so to have a board that wanted to go there was a really, it made my day, so to speak. I think, though, that what was really wise was to say it isn't going to work, and for the many reasons that you have mentioned, and that we needed to go a different direction. So I appreciate the recommendation. I am a little concerned, though, about the opportunities for biliteracy. And in all of our conversations up to this point, we haven't really spent an enormous amount of time talking about it. But it's really critical, I think, that our native Spanish speakers have the opportunity to have that biliteracy. I think the statement that was made in the community comment period about taking away the Spanish, I know, because Dr. Gordon spoke about this at Richmond the other night with the parents, that's not what we're doing here. But I want to be sure that the system is saying that in any ways that is possible. And I'm looking at that if you're a non-native Spanish or French, you cannot take level 1 and 2, and that's what that is saying, I think, right? In middle school. So could you go back and just revisit with the intention that we are putting a lot to make our students proficient in English, which is where they will be successful. It's necessary, but we want that opportunity for them to also be as strong in their native language as possible. The other thing I wondered about, I know that the principals have met and you've had a lot of conversation about this, but not all of the students are going to Munhall, Anderson, and Richmond. So I want to be sure that the few students who are at the other buildings feel like they belong. I know they live in the neighborhood, and that's, you make me cry, Mr. Jarrett. That is a real important piece. But will there be somebody there who will be able to communicate with the families? Do we have secretaries who can speak to families when they call? Are we sure we have all the translations ready? Because it's part of belonging that you can communicate with the families. So make sure that if I call you and I speak, and I know, for instance, like Norton Creek has
Gujarati.
yeah, How do we communicate with our families and does the board need to consider that? How we are going to be able to provide that with also the recognition that the kids are being new to the school. So are the families.
I think one of the important pieces on that is, I believe the number is 55 languages spoken just by our multilingual learners. So that your ask is a good ask. It will be a challenging ask if you were to say that we would have front office staff who would be able to do those different pieces. We've been struggling for, I think, over 2 years now to try to hire a teacher of Gujarati, and that has been unsuccessful to this point. So there are some limits and challenges to our ability to be able to connect. But you're right, at the end of the day, it's about ensuring where Nate and Lisa were talking about, creating that welcoming environment that our parents know that this is a safe place to come in, have those conversations, and sometimes they may be more challenging because of the language, but that we continuously are working to try to overcome some of those challenges in our district now. But I do appreciate that. Thank you.
And maybe just sit down with the secretaries and the admin assistants. What do you need in order to help that belonging? And my last question is, are there any grants that we're getting for FTE? I feel like we had that. No? Okay.
That's a hard no.
That head shake was very quick. Ms. Mickey, you brought up a good point regarding the dual language piece at Richmond. I can say that I've had a number of conversations in the community of parents who children are native English speakers who felt they really benefited from the program and achieved their seal of biliteracy. I know we have a board member who has children that have a couple of them, right? So that's one thing that I think we're doing this is the right recommendation for the district, but I do want us to be aware of that impact, that there's an opportunity here that is changing, and not all the kids have that opportunity anymore. So anything that we can do for our language acquisition or other things, I think is a real benefit to the district. So it's a great point on that. And it is something that we've heard quite a bit from the community.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to add as well that I've was an advocate for two-way dual language in a slightly different iteration than was proposed and the direction we're going. I'm happy to see that we're going in a direction now, though, that we're going to be able to be responsive to all students, but not just responsive to all students within a school, but for the staff as well, that everybody's on the same page now. We're on the same page as other districts. Our students are all on the same page from school to school. If they move within the district, they're going to be within a program that's going to be the same. And I think that is, when we talk about community, I think that's the biggest thing. When you go from one community or one neighborhood to another, and you have to pick up entire different programming and everything like that, I think that's less welcoming. So I think keeping this uniform and making us a larger community is certainly the direction I think we need to go.
Thank you. So the next part are recommendations around academic success criteria and implementation success criteria. The academic success criteria are pieces that we're going to lean into from the study itself that you will see here. And Tina, do you want to walk us through at a high level?
Okay.
On where we're at. Notice that's simple. No, we're good. We're rolling.
And I think you can see tonight in our presentation that because of our A-ROI process, we're presenting to you tonight the most detailed and intentional program design that we've ever brought to the board, which considers both space and cost and programming and curriculum. Also, that extends both to our success criteria. I'm going to present some recommended academic and implementation success criteria tonight, but with the caveat that we are going to also get this out to a wider group of voices in the district for feedback and consideration, and bring those goals back to you at the next Learning and Teaching meeting on March 17th. But let's start with our academic success criteria, and we want to look at that really through 3 measures. The first one is the one that Dave spoke in some depth tonight about, which is our A-ROI model, which looks at 2 factors, not only our annual progress towards proficiency in English, but also are our students growing at or above the national average. So we need students to meet both of those goals, so that's an and goal for our students. And we're going to use that 50-80 model that Dave named to make sure that we are getting to that program quality, and we will continue to use that A-ROI model for that academic success. Now that goal will not be, we will not be able to look at that data until November 2026, because we need a whole year and we have to get access scores and IAR scores, and then those national percentages. So to that cause, we need some academic success criteria that are more timely and linked to our in-district data. So for that, we are going to use our iReady diagnostic data, and we would expect that our students we will look at both the collaborative and in-classroom models. But for example, we would expect that our students in those in-classroom models at Richmond would be achieving at least that median % progress towards typical growth by winter. So we'll know in winter we will have some data to bring to the board for both math and ELA. And then we also want to look at those access scores. We talked about the importance of that over and over tonight. We are going to look at those students that have that access score of 4.8, which is some proficiency in English. And we really want to look at the stretch growth goals in iReady, because we know that stretch growth is the lever that brings students to grade level proficiency. And then finally, using our IAR data, we will look at 3rd grade multilingual students and ELA proficiency. We know how important and pivotal that 3rd grade year is for reading, and we want to monitor those students closely. So those are examples of academic success criteria. I also want to,
as I would name them, the Heidi Feargrave question that you ask each time: when are we going to see the results of this program? So it is honestly a tribute to this board and their questions and their considerations about where are we at and when are we going to see this achievement by? But it is a piece of the A-ROI process. This next one is more of a hybrid. This is not in their normal suite of work around the implementation. This came from an opportunity I had to present at the conference with another individual whose district has been implementing this for a number of years. One of the things that they found were they had a great academic success criteria, but each time they continued to go back to it and look at it and say, why are we not achieving this? And they had to take some really hard look at themselves and saying, we'll just say the curriculum wasn't being implemented correctly. So they were never going to get to the academic side. So she really spoke to me about this ability to have an implementation criteria too. What's that right out of the gate that set us up for long-term academic success? So this is really attributed to being able to be at a conference like that, learn from other people and other districts who've been engaged in this for many more years, and seeing some of the slight downfalls. But this was one of those pieces that I really gravitated to the moment I heard about it. I'm like, we need that. So Tina, sorry.
thank you. And so we're going to look at the implementation success criteria. As Dr. Gordon said, this is really aligned with with our implementation science as well. So when we look at implementation success criteria, we're talking about what are the adult actions that are going to increase student learning outcomes. And that's really our theory of action. So what are all the layers of the district system, the district layer, the L&T layer, the building layer, and the teacher layer that will contribute to increased student learning outcomes? So We start with just the very basic thing of getting all teachers trained in our guaranteed and viable curriculums, Wonders, and our phonics program. We would want that to happen before school starts next year. We also see the layer of using the access data for the first time in very intentional ways to create language goals for students in those classrooms. So we'll be integrating not only academic content standards, but also the ELD goals for students. We also talked about how will we pay attention to small group instruction, that's happening, and we're monitoring that. We want to implement the progress monitoring quarterly in the elementary school so we can monitor our ML data. This also includes an L&T team collaborating to develop professional learning timeline, so that will be in conjunction with our teachers. And then as a learning and teaching department, we will attend those progress monitoring team meetings, conduct site visits, and monitor those implementation goals, reporting to the board each quarter.
I want to touch a little bit on the curriculum, the professional learning, I apologize,
Yes.
around the curriculum.
And this is pivotal to this entire plan, is that I can say we've talked a lot tonight about learning gaps and a program not working, but I would be remiss to say this was not the fault of our teachers or our students. This was a district issue. We did not support the teachers well with curriculum or professional learning, and we also did not design a program that was effective for students. So very intentional about the professional learning that needs to happen. First and foremost, it will be curriculum training with Wonders and the 95 Phonics group and Vocabulary Surge. It will be the same training that was so successful for our monolingual teachers when we implemented our new curriculum in 2023. That will include all of our resources, learning with the vendors, as well as our district curriculum maps and scope and sequence. Then as far as not only attacking curriculum, but also the instruction in the classroom. So how can we use those data-driven pieces from Access by using the Elevation platform for our teachers? We're going to start with kind of like a top-down model. We're going to train the coaches and specialists right away starting this spring, and then move that out to our TBE teachers and our bilingual resource specialists. And then really to improve the entire system at D303, that training for all of our general education teachers. So we're going to scale that up as we get good at that professional learning. Teachers will also get professional learning on the SIOP model, which is the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It's really a framework to integrate academic content with language goals. That will happen in that same fashion, first coaches and specialists, then our bilingual resource specialist, and then general education specialist. We will become a district that's trained in SIOP. And then finally, in addition to that instruction piece, we will also be looking at, this is really linked for me to our PLC work and that strategic priority, because we will be designing best first instruction for all learners, including our multilingual learners. So how do I incorporate language goals and the math standards? How do I design small group instruction and using the assets of the students and their native language? And how can teachers get that embedded job-embedded professional learning with a coaching cycle for their own personalized learning needs?
Thank you so much. That was a lot. Any questions in that section there around implementation goals?
I do.
Others? Yes, please.
Well, related to the goals, I'm just wondering, I feel like to not really see any performance results until January, at least from an iReady standpoint, that seems very late to me. And I'm wondering why we would not want to show at least an early read, early indicator, something, you know, in the November timeframe. That's 90 days in approximately to the school year.
We can consider that. We'll consider that. As Mrs. King said, that we'll come back to the board with full, so we will absolutely bring that under consideration.
We could consider our common district assessment data. That's something we could bring sooner.
The other question I had, when you talked about 100% of the multilingual team participates in quarterly data meetings, is that the same as PLCs? Or what is that?
No, it's different. It would be bringing a PLC with just a grade level, but we'd be looking across grade levels, K-5, and bringing that whole team together in the building to say, how are multilingual students doing in our building this quarter, so that we could look for bright spots, things that we're working, scale those up, or look for areas of need where we really need to grow. We're not meeting the mark.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. And then I guess my final comment with the bullet up above for that, again, I would think, because the small group instruction is such a critical component of what's being recommended, I would think that we would be at 100% well before November 1st. In just my view.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts on that area?
I have a couple of observations. The proposed goals or proposed measures of success, rather, two things. National average is prominent in the first goal. Once again, I'll say that national average is an insufficient goal for D303. I recognize the challenge, but I'd rather set the benchmark and the goal high so that we allocate the appropriate resources to achieve that goal. That's better for students. The other is that there's no comparative in these goals between in-classroom and collaborative. In fact, collaborative is not even on the page. So we need to take a look at the comparison of those two program types.
Thank you. We'll take that view. Okay. Board, thank you. Community members, staff members, L&T, and everybody involved in this process. I know this has been a lengthy process for many of our families and for our staff at Richmond, in particular, staff and students at Richmond and our families. I really believe in this recommendation. I believe in this recommendation because there are so many individuals involved in this recommendation. We broadened our table. We opened our table up to more. We really leaned into our commitment statement of together. Together is how we're going to be doing this work. You're going to be seeing this more often at learning teaching meetings where we have a broader representation of people, from our principals, our teachers, our leaders throughout the district in many different ways. So I'm very proud of this recommendation where we sit today. So board, from what I hear, I'll be bringing this forward to the March 10th board meeting for consideration there. We'll bring forward some
Dr. Gordon,
I apologize.
yeah, Dr. Gordon, I'm not convinced that March 10th that's 7 days away. We had an awful lot of conversation about space. We had an awful lot of conversation about the staffing models. We've had conversation about success measures. I have about a half a dozen other questions that are sizable. I'm not yet comfortable that the 7th is enough time for admin to answer those questions to my satisfaction.
How does the rest of the board feel there?
Well, I just want to know how that impacts staffing. Because we could go forward but not have everything, all the space issues. And my concern is, I don't want to wait another year because we have more questions. I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but we have this problem called.
Mr. Lackner, would you be suggesting then a special meeting later in
I am
March or
suggesting,
postponing till April?
I am not suggesting a special meeting. I am recalling that this board sat here on November 13th of '24 and made a decision by vote after an awfully long process. And we've had a very deep conversation tonight. And I appreciate the challenge. And I've come to the resolution tonight, or the realization rather tonight, that we are closer to a better answer tonight than we were at that vote. We've seen more data tonight than we saw in preparation, in spite of those other conversations that led up to that vote. That vote had attached to it an awfully big price tag. This vote has attached to it a big price tag in terms of time, energy, effort, and student success. I have yet to hear from administration that we're up against a calendar that the 10th is necessary in order for us to move forward. And so until I hear that, I'm unwilling to make a vote after this one deep conversation of this magnitude.
And I'm okay, let me be really clear, I'm okay to postpone it. I just don't want us to keep doing something that we might be able to, if we can go till April 15th, I don't know what the cutoff is. But I know that we end up having to do some things by April 1st, so.
The staffing is the piece that we would have a deeper conversation on. So if we could have that conversation around staffing, so we would bring the board's questions on just staffing and ensure that we have that piece for the board as we work through the construction of those pieces. So the HR team and staff can move that piece forward. Would that be acceptable?
What would be a reasonable date for that?
I'm looking at my friend back here who's now standing up and coming forward.
Dr. Gordon,
We're adding to our table.
I'm going to add to this as well that for a staffing issue, there's kind of a time frame. We have some specific requirements.
Correct.
And it's not just getting people, but getting the best people, and that's who I want.
There we go.
Yes, that is accurate. We are in the process right now of attending job fairs and recruiting staff. So that is one concern, especially for bilingual staff. That is a difficult position to fill in any good situation for a school district. The other piece is this involves transferring of staff, and the transfer process happens in March, and it usually takes place and is completed by spring break. So that's our deadline to get all of this piece put in place and have people in their spots, because then after that, the voluntary transfer process can start where people can then apply for positions that are open in the district.
Thank you for being the deliverer of really inconvenient truths. This is not directed at you specifically. It is March 3rd. It's March 3rd. And I'm frustrated as a board member who's waved this document around the equity audit around since 2022 to sit here and have administration say to this board, well, here you are, guys. Make a decision in 7 days on the fate of a group of kids. It's really frustrating. This is probably the most frustrating experience I've had as a board member. And I understand that you're delivering that news, but this is a time crunch that you've put the board under. And it is horrifying to me. I'm appalled. I'll hold the rest of my comments.
So what would you like to do? We can have multiple meetings. We can come back so the board has that opportunity. We can do the March 10th and then take action on the March 17th for the board. So you have 2 additional times with this conversation on the FTE side of things, on the staffing side of things.
So is there an opportunity for us to have a special meeting of the board, either in advance of the regular board meeting, after the regular board meeting? How should we brainstorm about this?
I think we're going to have it before the regular board meeting if we want to, if we want to make any motion on portions of this.
There's two, the way I see it, there's 2 challenges that we have, guys. The first is the staffing challenge. I think no matter what, the staffing challenge, and again, I don't know what the implications are for transfers or between buildings and other things that we do. I know that we have a staffing issue that we've acknowledged now. I'd love options around that. The second thing, I'm with Mr. Lackner on this as far as the buildings and the larger cost implications of this. I do have the concern around spaces and everything else. I realize that effort is going to take some time. When we voted on this previously, these were kind of combined, right? I would be interested in some decoupling, or we're going to have to change our previous decision that this board made. And I'm concerned that potentially there's going to be a couple of options out of this from a space and other things that might result in some back and forth on it. So however we can decouple the staffing from this to get what we, to go out and hire who we need. And that's why I asked the question about how are we getting these resources, or is there going to be any challenges? But however we can decouple that and take some pressure off for our other pieces, I would look to administration to provide some recommendations for that.
That's why I'm suggesting that if we had a special board meeting for those specific items that we can address, we would have to do that before the regular meeting, in order to say, all right, these are the pieces we know we can address. We can talk about those, address those. So if we're going, I'm not suggesting we need it, but if that's what we need, it would need to occur before then.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the only way forward.
I would just echo again, it feels that the board is put in a position of a time crunch, and this is not the first time. So I would just provide my disappointment that this is continuing to happen in various forms. And so, now we're really put into an unfortunate situation.
So again, we have March 10th, Monday. I can ask Ms. Marsan to reach out to board members to find times before and after that meeting to see if we have a quorum on that topic. And then we can do multiple meetings to ensure that we have the staffing aspect taken care of. And then the 17th, we'll have the conversation on the facility itself.
But
Or later.
if you walk this through, again, this is really presented very piecemeal, because if we move forward with the staffing, but then if there's facility concerns, then there's another piece to the entire plan where there's issues that need to be resolved. And by the way, we haven't really voted on this.
That's what I'm trying to get towards.
So we need more time. So we'll probably not make the staffing. I know I cannot be here before the 10th, so maybe there's something on the 10th that we have. We've done this before where we've met, every committee has met on something, and we go until the board is satisfied that they've got what they need to make a decent, and I'm sorry, we won't have the staffing. And we've let more people down. I get it. I'm not nearly as frustrated as you are, Mr. Lackner. I think I will be really frustrated if we don't do this process with every program from now on. We as a board took this on. We voted, I'll get passionate now. We voted on a lot of things on that November 13th. Then we took on redistricting, we took on a lot, and Dr. Gordon has not been here for more than 2.5 years. We've been successful in getting ourselves on the way. I am totally with you that we have let kids down. I'm ashamed of myself that we have let kids down. But I also know that we have to move forward, and we have to use this process more often to be sure we do the right thing, so we're not throwing stuff at the wall to find out if it works. And part of me wants to be sure that when you debrief about everything, that you have the process in good faith, in good ways, so everybody knows what the process is, and that when we do the high school experience, when we look at special ed, when we look at all-day kindergarten, when we look at all those programs, we go through this process.
I appreciate those points, Mrs. McCabe, and I think the challenge I face process-wise here is that a vote for any element ties us into the entirety of the solution. And so what we're saying is, it is this one thing that will force us to have to make the vote, because once we vote on the people, we've voted on the program. And so from my perspective, we have as a board, and this was a lively and very good conversation about program efficacy and about the specific design of this program. We now have 7 days to get some pretty sizable questions answered before that 10th meeting. And that's the challenge I face with it.
But we don't have to vote on the 10th. It's our regular board meeting. We could have a special board meeting after the 10th to give a little more time, right? Am I right, or am I?
You're right. I mean, we can use the 10th to have
That's
a
what,
live-
that's what I was originally asking, is are we proposing a special board meeting after the 10th?
I would assume yes.
And I will, Mr. Lackner, the frustration, 12 years ago, we made the decision to link Richmond and Davis 5.5 weeks after the public was notified that there was something going on with the school. That's a frustration I have, that we continue to make decisions too quickly or without enough time. I'm happy to see what we've presented here tonight. I'm in favor of it as I see it tonight. I know there are obstacles we need to address, and I'm confident that we're going to address those things. I'm just also aware that there is a timeline when the best teachers are looking for their jobs.
The irony of this conversation, Mr. McNally, is my big question is whether or not that staffing model has enough headcount in it, particularly for pieces of it. And so, I understand the pressure, and
Right.
I'm not yet convinced that we have the staffing model correct.
No, that's why I was suggesting that there might be a special meeting after.
So let's work towards that.
Let me offer up something just for consideration real
Can
quickly
I
here.
ask a question?
I just want to finish this thought just for a moment here. So we've had a couple of programs proposed to us, right? There's a few different things on the table. So maybe an exercise for the administration from a talent management perspective is, regardless of what the board is ultimately going to decide, are there roles that we are being proposed that we will need no matter what? Right? Because if that is the situation, then we would be wise to open up those requisitions, especially for roles that are challenging to fill, right? So perhaps we can do just a thorough review of what it would be in each of the proposed models. We could determine which would absolutely be necessary. We can bring that back to the board, and we can open up those requisitions. And then, to your point, we're not pigeonholing ourselves in one direction where there's unanswered questions, but we also aren't losing out the opportunity to yield the best of talent, which I think everybody in this room and in public and all of us at the table would like to ensure that we do.
Thank you, Becky. This is Kate Bell. Sorry, I'm traveling for work. Marcy, I have a quick question for clarification. When you were talking about the deadlines in March, were you specifically referring to adding new staff, or were you talking about the first deadline, meaning that we needed to set up the right amount of time and hit that deadline for staff that would be transferring, and then we add more staff?
So we don't have a deadline for adding new staff. We add new staff the whole school year, as you see on our personnel report every month. The deadline is for doing staff transfers, because that really starts the first part of the process for involuntary transfers, so staff that are going to be moved to other buildings or other programs. That's what would need to be completed by the end of March, and then after that is when voluntary, so people that want to move but don't have to move, then have an opportunity to start applying for positions that are open in the district. Before then, we start the hiring process for outside of the district. Does that make sense?
And that's
Yes, it does, thank you for that
contractually defined.
clarification. So correct me if I'm wrong, but does that mean then we are not bound by the March 10th deadline for voting on all of this if we're just talking about staff transfers at first, and then maybe that would meet Ed McNally's idea of having a special board meeting after the 10th?
I mean, it would meet the needs. It just, involuntary transfer process isn't a process that happens in a day. It is a lengthy process to go through that. And it's what we did last year when we had to do the boundary changes and Richmond and Davis changes, Lincoln closing, all of that. It takes a while. So we need some time to have that in place and have that completed then before spring break. So then we can start the voluntary transfer process after spring break.
And to clarify, Mrs. Bell, what I was suggesting was essentially what Mr. Kuchert was suggesting, and that is that there are pieces that we can put together, we can assemble ahead of time before we know what the whole is going to look like. And ultimately voting on this, the final process, or the final product, I should say, doesn't have to take place on March 10th. And so that's what the special meeting was, the idea of a special meeting. I just don't want to put us, for those positions that are not, that are unique to this, if this is the direction we're going, I don't want to wait and miss out and find out we missed out by a week on the guy that would have been perfect for this job.
I would agree. I also think that we've been talking in D303, this has been a subject of discussion about this particular population. And I could be wrong, but to your point, Ed, this goes back quite a ways. I mean, I think my oldest was in second grade. So we're talking 2009.
2011 is when, March 17th, 2011 is when the vote was made to hook together Richmond and Davis.
Well, true, but there was a reason for that. So that data was already out. So I'm guessing maybe around 2009, 2010, it was identified back then that this population needed better support in D303. So what frustrates me as a board member is I want to not fail that population anymore. I want to support them the best we possibly can. And I can say, watching this presentation and reading through all this material, this is the best presentation I've seen with, as far as how are we going to effectively support these kiddos. It was so much more complete and comprehensive than anything I've seen. So I really appreciated the approach we're taking. I appreciate your point, Mr. Lackner, about the time crunch. However, I feel like there's reasons for the time crunch that are outside of just what we're seeing here at the table. So it would be my hope that we can do some of the decisions on March 10th. And I don't know if doing the staff transfer means we're accepting all of the parts of the process as a whole, because we do need to address this population. We absolutely have to support them in a better, more efficient way. So at the very least, we would be supporting them with different staff at a minimum, in my opinion.
So what I'm hearing is March 10th, we're going to give the board more information. Ms. Marsan will reach out to board members to find another time for a special board meeting to either continue the conversation or have the vote at that next meeting. So either March 10th or that meeting to quickly follow March 10th. So we have at least 2 more dates to have conversations on significant portions of the staffing, while trying to work with Wold and others to have the overall, kind of a general sense of the cost that we're looking at for potential construction at Richmond in other places. Does that work?
I was going to ask if there's an opportunity, I know it's not a lot of time, but the construction, the space constraints, if we move the business services ahead, to give us that information so that the board can be informed with the great stuff that we saw tonight from the L&T side, but those additional questions, because to me, that's the rest of the picture. I'm going to trust the staffing plan that the teams have worked out. I mean, any increase in, I think what we already knew was a gap, is kind of what I was expecting. And then I think we're going to have to monitor that piece of it. But the big piece for me is going to be the space needs and that price tag. So that I think it kind of gives us that clarity from our previous decision and lets us make a full decision here.
So I believe we have our regular board meeting March 10th, L&T again on the 17th, business services on the 20th. So are you proposing moving that to the 17th?
That's, so this
or-
is more of a question.
So we do have some items that we'll need to talk about on the 20th that will not be ready ahead of time just because of bids that we'll be receiving between now and then. Would you be comfortable
An
having the
abbreviated
discussion
agenda.
about the construction at
Yes. If we're ready for that, I would be comfortable having those items as a for discussion item on the 10th, and then if the other members of the board would find that helpful, because if you guys are ready for that, because to me, that's the full rest of the package, and I do appreciate Mr. Lackner's point of, hey, if we're voting on the staffing, we're kind of committing to the whole thing without seeing the rest of it. So if we can have those for that date, I would much prefer to give the team time to work on the processes.
Okay, so perhaps what we're looking at here is a special meeting of the board in advance.
Or putting it as an agenda item on the 10th. So we won't work it in committee, right? But it'll be like, hey, these are business services items that we're bringing for discussion as a follow-up, right?
Yeah, that makes
but
sense to
I
me.
think
They'd
the
be
suggestion-
added as for discussion, but they won't.
Yes. Not for action, for discussion.
Most of our committee meetings are committees of the whole, and so adding that to the regular board meeting as a for discussion item should be no trouble.
Yeah, the suggestion for the meeting, excuse me, before the regular board meeting was just to address concerns that we wanted if the vote was going to take place on that, at that point. But I'm perfectly fine with delaying that vote. But I do share Mrs. McCabe's concern that I don't want to push this off again and again. And then we find ourselves in a position where we're unable to do this effectively because frankly, that's what led us into this space in the first place. And not holding that on, that was previous boards and previous administration, but that's where we are.
So perhaps the idea here is to have these requisitions prepared in the event that we do move forward with this, try and figure out what our drop dead deadline is in order to be able to approve this and still try and solicit the best talent and still get the answers on the building utilization. So maybe we could figure out what those dates would be, the firm dates, and then ensure that if we do move forward with a yes vote on this, that we would be prepared one way or another.
I think we have consensus.
So I think, without further ado, that brings us to the closure of the meeting here at 8:33 PM.
Who I was going to say future agenda items.
Oh, thank you.
March 17th.
I think we may have
we heard a bunch.
few of them, but if that was premature adjournment here, let's open it up for any future agenda items aside from what has already been stated.
Well, I think our plan is to bring the high school experience in April. March 17th was going to be a smaller meeting. We can't remember exactly now what you said was on the agenda.
Resource renewals and our health curriculum recommendation. We still need to bring the resource renewals.
I did have an ask. I've heard it recently, and I know that we're the math interventionists. I would like just maybe some information from admin around the interventionists that we have at staffed across the district.
All that are all current.
Correct.
Requested earlier.
I think we were talking about all the building, but I just love what are the job descriptions and those pieces of it too.
Okay, well, thank you for the robust conversation here this evening. Thanks for all the hard work. It's great to see some faces here at the board table that we don't always get to see. I think we are closer and closer to a resolution to this really important initiative within the district. Again, to the community, please keep your feedback coming. We do want to hear from you. It is valued. We do take it strongly into consideration. And yeah, we'll keep this train rolling. Thanks, everyone. Adjournment at 8:35.